She had fired 37 people in a single afternoon and slept just fine that night. She had walked away from a $100 million deal because someone kept her waiting 11 minutes. She had ended friendships, ended relationships, ended things that most people would spend years trying to hold together. And she had done it all without flinching. But standing in the middle of a darkened highway at 11:15 on a Thursday night, her $70,000 car dead beneath her, her cell signal reduced to one flickering bar, Vanessa Holloway felt something she hadn't felt in years. Completely, humiliatingly helpless. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The car died without drama. No explosion, no grinding of metal, no warning light that she might have noticed if she'd been paying attention to the dashboard instead of drafting a termination letter on her phone. The engine simply stopped producing sound, the steering wheel went stiff in her hands, and the Porsche 911 Turbo S, pearl white, 6 months old, driven fewer than 3,000 miles because Vanessa spent most of her life in the back of hired cars, coasted to the shoulder of State Route 9 in what appeared to be the absolute middle of nowhere, and sat there, silent, defeated. She stared at the dashboard for a moment. Then she said a word she never used in professional settings, put the car in park out of habit, and stepped out into the night. The air hit her first, cool and thick with something she didn't have a name for. Not pollution, not exhaust, not the aggressive cleaned air smell of her apartment building's filtered ventilation system. Just air. The kind that came with darkness and trees and the distant sound of something moving through underbrush 50 feet off the road. She stood in her Tom Ford blazer and her 4-inch heels and looked down the highway in both directions. Nothing. No headlights. No signs. No civilization in any direction she could see. Her phone had one bar. She tried her assistant first, Marcus, who had been her assistant for 3 years and had never once failed to answer a call in under 2 rings, and listened to it go straight to voicemail. She tried her car service. Busy signal. She tried the Porsche emergency roadside line printed on a laminated card in her glove compartment and got a recorded message telling her that her estimated wait time was 45 to 60 minutes. 45 to 60 minutes. Vanessa looked at the tree line. Something rustled in it again. She got back in the car, locked the doors, and started thinking through the problem the way she thought through every problem, systematically, without panic, with the understanding that every situation had a solution if you were willing to look for it without letting emotion cloud your assessment. Okay, the car is dead. No signal strong enough for a reliable call. It's 11:15 on a Thursday. You're somewhere between Millbrook and whatever the next town is, and you missed the last exit because you were typing and not paying attention to road signs. She allowed herself one moment of self-directed anger about that. Just one. You're wearing heels that are not designed for asphalt walking. You have no cash. You never carry cash. You have 2 working credit cards, a dead luxury vehicle, and whatever's in your laptop bag. She went through the bag. A laptop, charging cables, a packet of almonds from a hotel minibar she hadn't opened, a pashmina she'd gotten as a gift and kept forgetting to leave at the office, a business card from someone she'd met at a conference in Vienna 4 months ago and never followed up with. Her backup battery pack was, she now remembered, sitting on her kitchen counter back in Manhattan, where she had left it charging and not picked it up before she got in the car that morning, because she never needed backup power, because she was always near an outlet, because she was always somewhere that mattered. She was not, currently, somewhere that mattered. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, coming from the north. Vanessa got out of the car again. She stood on the shoulder and waved, feeling something she distantly recognized as embarrassment, but pushed through because practicality won over pride, always. The car slowed. It was an old pickup truck, dark blue, with a cracked left taillight. The window came down and a man in his 60s with a white beard and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead looked at her car and then at her. "Broke down?" he said. "The engine stopped. I'm not sure what the issue is." He nodded like this was a normal thing to say on a dark highway at 11 p.m. "Got a mechanic?" "In New York, yes." He almost smiled. "Closer than that, I hope." "I was hoping you could point me to someone in the area." The old man scratched the back of his neck. "Carter's place is about 6 miles back, only shop that'd have the tools for something like that." He nodded at the Porsche. German engine. Carter's good with European. Everything else around here's just regular auto shops. Carter, she repeated. Is there a number? Probably. You'd have to look it up. I'd drive you, but I'm going the other way. He reached into his glove box and produced a folded paper map, an actual paper map, and squinted at it in the light from his cab. Harlow Road off Route 9 southbound. You'll see the sign, blue building, can't miss it. She looked down at her heels. I can't miss it, she repeated. She did not walk 6 miles in her heels. She walked half a mile, which was still enough to produce a blister on her left heel that she wouldn't properly notice until the following morning. A woman in a minivan saw her on the shoulder and stopped without being flagged down, which surprised Vanessa in a way she didn't fully know how to articulate. The woman, late 40s, nurse's scrubs, a pine tree air freshener swinging from her rearview mirror, drove her the remaining distance without asking why she was out there or making any kind of commentary about her clothes or her car or the fact that her mascara had apparently done something in the night air that she didn't know about until she caught her own reflection in the minivan's window. The woman just drove. She dropped Vanessa off at a blue metal building set back from a 2-lane road, with a gravel lot and 2 bays with the doors rolled down and a single light burning in what appeared to be an office window on the side. You sure someone's there at this hour? Vanessa asked. Carter usually works late, the woman said. He's got a kid, so he works after she's asleep. Vanessa hadn't had time to parse what that meant before the minivan pulled away. The gravel was not kind to her heels. She crossed the lot carefully, avoided a dark puddle near the first bay door, and knocked on the glass panel of the office door. Nothing for a moment. Then the sound of something being set down, a tool, maybe, or a mug, and footsteps. And the door opened. The man who answered was not what she expected, though she would have had trouble articulating what she'd expected. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that needed cutting and hands that were wiped clean but still carried the ghost of grease around the cuticles. He was wearing a gray t-shirt that had a small hole near the collar and dark canvas work pants, and he was looking at her with the kind of calm, unreadable attention that she usually only saw in people who were very good at poker or very used to being surprised. Hi, he said. Just that. Not can I help you. Not we're closed, not the confused scan up and down that most people did when they saw someone who looked like Vanessa standing in a place that didn't fit her. Just hi, delivered like it was the most natural thing in the world. My car broke down on Route 9, she said. Someone told me you work on European engines. He nodded once. What is it? Porsche 911. It just died. No warning. I had it serviced 8 weeks ago. She caught herself adding that detail and wasn't sure why. Maybe because it felt important that she hadn't been negligent, that the car had failed her rather than the other way around. How far back? About 6.5 miles north. I walked half of it and got a ride. He looked at her heels briefly, then back at her face, and there was nothing judgmental in it, just observation. I can take a look tonight, he said. Probably won't be able to get parts until morning if it's something major, but I can at least tell you what it is. He stepped back from the doorway. You can wait inside, it'll be a few minutes. The office was small and cluttered in a specific, purposeful way. There was a metal desk with actual paperwork on it, invoices, she guessed, and a computer that was at least 4 years old by the look of it. A shelf along one wall held manuals, binders, a few loose tools that hadn't made it back to wherever they belonged. There was a coffee maker on a folding table and a child's drawing taped to the side of it. A house, a person with dark hair labeled Daddy, a smaller person labeled Me in uneven letters, and a flower that was as tall as both of them combined, which struck Vanessa as the kind of artistic choice she liked. She did not sit down because she didn't know if she was supposed to, and she did not look at the desk because that felt like prying, and she stood near the door for approximately 45 seconds before she heard a small voice from the hallway that connected to the back. Daddy? The man, Carter, appeared from the same hallway almost immediately. A little girl was behind him, maybe 5 or 6, wearing pajamas with cartoon owls on them and carrying a blanket with one hand while rubbing her eye with the other. She had his dark hair and a look of complete, unconcerned alertness that didn't match the pajamas at all. Hey, Bug, he said quietly. You're supposed to be asleep. I heard the door. I know, a customer came in. Go back to bed. The girl looked around him at Vanessa without shyness. Your shoes are really tall, she said. Lily, Carter said, in a tone that wasn't sharp but had a direction to it. They are, though. They are, Vanessa agreed. They're also not very practical for walking on gravel, it turns out. The girl considered this. You should wear sneakers, she said in the tone of someone delivering a verdict. I'm starting to think you're right. Carter guided his daughter back down the hallway with a hand between her shoulder blades, and Vanessa listened to the sound of him settling her back down. Not the words, just the murmur of it, low and patient. And then he came back out and grabbed a set of keys from a hook by the door. I've got a truck out back, he said. We'll go take a look. He didn't talk much in the truck. That wasn't nothing. Most people filled silence with noise, questions about what she did, where she was going, why she was out this way, and Vanessa had spent 15 years becoming very skilled at deflecting all of it without being rude. She'd gotten good at giving answers that were technically accurate and contained nothing real. Carter didn't ask. He drove with his arm resting in the open window, which she thought was either because the truck's AC was broken or because he just preferred it, and he watched the road with the same steady attention he'd given her at the door, and the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was just silence. Is it always this quiet out here? She asked, somewhere around mile 3, because she was not as comfortable with silence as she'd always told herself she was. Mostly, he said. Gets a little louder on weekends in summer. There's a town festival in August, parade, that kind of thing. Do you go? Lily likes the parade. She waited to see if he'd say more. He didn't. How old is she? Vanessa asked. 6 in September. She doesn't seem shy. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. No, she's really not. When they reached the Porsche, Carter pulled in behind it, left his headlights on, and got out. He opened the hood without ceremony and spent a few minutes with a flashlight looking at things that Vanessa couldn't identify and didn't pretend to. She stood to the side and watched him work, and what struck her, watching, was the quality of his attention. He was completely, genuinely in the problem. There was no performance to it. He wasn't explaining things to her, or narrating his process, or trying to demonstrate competence. He was just looking, checking, thinking, with the focus of someone who was actually interested in what was in front of him. She hadn't seen that in a long time. Most of the people in her world were always performing something. Fuel pump, he said eventually. Is that expensive? The part, yeah, for this model. Labor's not bad. He clicked the flashlight off. I can have it done by 10 tomorrow morning if I can get the part delivered early. There's a supplier in Albany I use. I'm supposed to be in a meeting at 9. He looked at her, not unkindly. In New York? Yes. Then you'll need a rental, or you can call someone. She thought about Marcus's voicemail. My assistant might be reachable in the morning. There's a motel about a mile from the garage, not fancy. He paused. Clean, though. The woman who runs it is Donna. Tell her Carter sent you. She'll give you a decent room. Vanessa looked at her Porsche, sitting dead on the shoulder, and felt something she hadn't felt in a professional context in years. The specific helplessness of being in a situation that money could not immediately solve. Because the problem was not money, it was time and logistics, and being in the wrong place at the wrong time with no infrastructure to catch her. Okay, she said. And then, because it was the right thing to say, and she didn't say it often enough, thank you. He nodded like it was nothing much, like helping a stranded stranger at 11:30 at night was just a thing that happened. Maybe, she thought, where he was from, it was. The motel was called the Pinecrest, and it was exactly what he'd said. Not fancy, but the sheets were clean and the lock worked, and there was a small white noise machine on the nightstand that someone had left behind. A guest, probably. That Donna told her she was welcome to use, in the matter-of-fact way of someone who assumed she knew what was useful. Vanessa lay on her back in the dark at 1 a.m. and stared at the ceiling and listened to the white noise and thought about the fuel pump. She thought about the drawing taped to the coffee maker. Daddy and me and the too tall flower. She thought about the way Carter had looked at the engine, not showing off, not performing, just in it. And something about that image wouldn't leave. She opened her phone. 3 bars now, for whatever reason. 3 voicemails from Marcus, 2 texts from her COO about the morning meeting, a calendar reminder, a news alert, an email from someone wanting a comment on a business magazine article she hadn't agreed to be in. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. The white noise machine breathed. She didn't sleep for a long time. Vanessa Holloway had built her first company at 22. It was a logistics software startup that she'd launched with $11,000 she'd saved working double shifts through college, a laptop she'd bought refurbished, and a willingness to cold call potential clients from her apartment until midnight if she had to. She'd slept on a second-hand futon for 2 years. She'd eaten convenience store food for so long that her doctor told her to take iron supplements. She'd been laughed at in meetings, talked over in pitch rooms, asked twice whether her boss would be joining them before people understood that she was the boss. By 25, she'd sold the company for $43 million. By 27, she'd launched 2 more. By 29, she'd taken one of them public. And the morning it opened on the exchange, she was sitting in a car outside the building watching the ticker on her phone, and her hands were completely steady, and she thought, this is what it was for. All of it. This. She had earned everything she had. She believed that, not in the way people said it when they wanted to feel good about themselves, but factually. She had tracked every hour, every sacrifice, every decision that had compounded into the life she was living, and she understood the math of it. What she hadn't understood, or had understood in theory but not felt, was what the math cost. There was a man she'd been with at 28, a venture capitalist named Aaron, who was smart and ambitious, and who she genuinely liked, and he'd said to her once, near the end, "Vanessa, you don't let anyone close enough to matter, not really." And she'd been angry at him for saying it, and then the relationship had ended, and afterwards she'd thought about it sometimes in quiet moments and decided he was probably right, and then she'd gotten busy again and stopped thinking about it. She didn't have many quiet moments. That was, she had always told herself, by design. She was at the garage by 8 in the morning. She'd walked the mile from the motel in different shoes. She kept a pair of flat travel shoes in her laptop bag since an incident in a Tokyo airport 3 years ago, and found Carter already in the second bay with the Porsche up on a lift. He was on the phone, apparently working out the parts delivery, and he held up a finger when he saw her and kept talking. She got coffee from the machine in the office. It was better than it had any right to be, strong and dark, and served in a ceramic mug with a chip in the rim, and sat in the chair by the desk and waited. The little girl appeared at 8:15. She came down the hallway from the back of the building where, Vanessa now understood, there was a living space, an apartment, or at least a set of rooms where the 2 of them lived, above or behind the garage. The girl was dressed now, in jeans and a pink shirt with a whale on it, and her dark hair was in a ponytail that had been done carefully but not perfectly, the slight asymmetry of something put together by a father rather than a mother. She stopped in the doorway when she saw Vanessa. "You're still here," she said. "My car's not ready yet." "Oh." She came into the room and looked at the coffee mug. "Do you want juice instead? We have orange juice. Daddy bought the kind with pulp because it's healthier, but I don't like the pulp." "I'm fine with the coffee, thank you." "I'm Lily," the girl said, like they hadn't already met. "I know. I'm Vanessa." Lily climbed into the other chair. There were only 2, and looked at her with frank, uncomplicated curiosity. "Do you live far away?" "Pretty far, yes. New York City." "Have you been to the Statue of Liberty?" "I haven't, actually." Lily looked like this was a significant failing, but she was going to be polite about it. "My teacher showed us pictures. It's really big." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "Why haven't you gone?" "I think sometimes when you live in a place, you stop seeing it." The girl thought about this. "That doesn't make sense." "No," Vanessa admitted. "It really doesn't." Carter came through the door then, phone back in his pocket, and looked at the 2 of them with the expression of a man who was not surprised, but was also not entirely sure what to do about what he was looking at. "Bug, you eat breakfast?" "Not yet." "Go eat breakfast." "Can Vanessa eat with us?" He looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at him. "You don't have to," he said. "I've got granola bars in the drawer if you just want something quick." "Granola bars are boring," Lily said firmly. "We have eggs. Daddy makes good eggs." "She's not wrong," he said, and there was something in the way he said it, The slight resignation of a man who had learned that his daughter was going to be honest about things, whether it was convenient or not, that made Vanessa smile before she could stop herself. "I'd like eggs," she said. The kitchen behind the garage was small and real. Not staged, not renovated, not the kind of kitchen that appeared in the backgrounds of interviews or in magazine profiles. Just a kitchen, a little cramped, a little worn, with a window above the sink that looked out on the back lot, and morning light coming through it at an angle that made the whole room warmer than it had any right to be. Carter made eggs the way serious people made eggs. Low heat and patience, not stirring them too much. Lily set the table with the focused efficiency of someone who had been given this job long enough that she didn't need to think about it. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses of orange juice, the pulpy kind that she'd already warned Vanessa about. "You have meetings today?" Carter asked, cracking the second egg. "I had one at 9. My assistant is rescheduling." "What do you do?" She'd been waiting for this question. It came for everyone eventually. "I run a few companies." He nodded. Not particularly impressed, not particularly disinterested. The way someone nodded when the answer was complete and they didn't need more. "Here or New York?" "Based in New York, some operations elsewhere." "What kind of companies?" "Tech, mostly. Some logistics. One in the sustainable packaging space, which is less interesting than people expect it to be." That got something. Not a laugh, but a fractional shift in his expression. "Why is it less interesting?" "Because 90% of what sounds exciting in a pitch is actually just spreadsheets and vendor negotiations and regulatory compliance." "Yeah," he said, "that's most things." Lily put the orange juice on the table and climbed onto her chair and said, "I'm going to have a company when I grow up." "What kind?" Vanessa asked. "Dogs," Lily said without hesitation. "Like a dog shelter? Or a dog training business?" "Just dogs, all kinds of dogs." She picked up her fork. "I'll figure out the business part later." "That's actually a reasonable approach," Vanessa said. Carter set the eggs on the table and sat down, and Lily immediately started telling him about a dream she'd had about a dog that could talk. And he listened. Not the distracted listening of a parent who had learned to generate responses without fully engaging, but actual listening, with questions that proved he'd heard what she said. And Vanessa sat across from both of them in the small, warm kitchen and ate eggs that were, without question, very good, and felt like she had walked into a room she didn't have a map for. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar, like a frequency she hadn't tuned into before. The car was ready by 11:40. Carter went through everything with her, what he'd found, what he'd replaced, what to watch for. He didn't oversimplify because she was a woman, didn't get condescending when she asked clarifying questions. He just explained, clearly and without performance, the way someone explained something when they assumed you were capable of understanding it. She paid. She almost said that the amount was too low, and then thought better of it because it wasn't a favor, it was a job, and pointing out that she could afford more felt like its own kind of condescension. She went outside and sat in the driver's seat of her car for a moment. The engine turned over on the first try. She looked out through the windshield at the garage, at the blue metal building and the gravel lot and the bay doors, and the faded sign that said Carter Automotive in plain block letters. She should have driven back to the highway. Instead, she sat there for probably 2 minutes longer than she needed to. She came back the following Thursday. She told Marcus she had a client in the area, which was not true, but Marcus had been her assistant long enough to know when to ask follow-up questions and when not to, and this was a when not to. She drove the 2 hours in a different car, the Audi, because she wasn't sure she fully trusted the Porsche yet, and pulled into the gravel lot of Carter Automotive at 11 in the morning and sat for a moment before getting out because she wasn't entirely sure why she was there, and she had made a habit of knowing why she was wherever she was. But she got out. The bay door was up on the right side, and Carter was underneath a raised F-150 doing something to the undercarriage. He rolled out on the creeper when he heard her shoes on the gravel and looked up at her from the floor. "Vanessa," he said. Not, "Oh, you're back," or "What's wrong with the Porsche now?" or anything with a question attached to it. Just her name, straightforward, like her showing up was a reasonable thing. "I was in the area," she said. He held eye contact for a second in a way that might have meant he knew that wasn't exactly true, and then he nodded and got up. "Coffee?" "Yes," she said. "Please." They sat in the office for an hour. It wasn't like any conversation she usually had. No agenda, no subtext about what each party wanted from the exchange, no careful calibration of what to reveal and what to keep back. Carter talked about the F-150 he was working on. The owner was a farmer named Bud, who'd had the truck since 2003 and refused to buy a new one, which Carter seemed to find completely reasonable. And she found herself genuinely interested, not in the truck specifically, but in the way he talked about the people whose cars he fixed, like he knew them, like they were real to him. "You grew up here?" she asked. "No, Philadelphia originally. Moved here about 4 years ago." "What brought you here?" A beat, brief and deliberate, and she felt it. "Wanted somewhere smaller," he said, "for Lily." She didn't push it. She had never been good at letting things go, professionally. She was famous, among people who worked with her, for digging at problems until there was nothing left to find. But something about the way he said it made her set it down. Not everything was her business. That wasn't a thing she'd really believed before. "She starts first grade in September," he said after a moment. "She's excited about it. She made me help her practice writing her full name in cursive, which she definitely doesn't need to know for first grade. But she decided she wanted to learn it. Did she get it?" "Pretty well, yeah." She also decided her middle name needed to be longer so she'd have more to practice with. He almost smiled. "She doesn't have a middle name, so now she insists it's Lily Moonbeam Carter, and we'll see how long that lasts." Vanessa laughed. It was sudden and genuine, and she noticed it, the realness of it, because she laughed at things all the time in professional settings, and it never felt quite like that. "She's going to be a lot," Vanessa said. "She's already a lot," he said. "She was a lot at 3 weeks old. She came out with opinions." She drove back to the city at 2 in the afternoon. She sat in traffic on the thruway and thought about the drive, which was strange to her because the drive had been nothing, just sitting and talking in a cluttered office. And yet she was thinking about it with more attention than she'd given to a lot of things that mattered significantly more on paper. She thought about the way he'd said Philadelphia originally, like that was a door he'd opened a crack and then pulled back. She thought about Lily insisting on Moonbeam. She thought about how Carter had looked when she laughed, not like he'd been trying to make her laugh, not with the satisfaction of someone who'd landed a joke they'd been building toward, but with something quieter. Like the laugh had surprised him a little, too. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, with a reschedule confirmation and 3 things requiring her immediate attention. She switched into that mode, the one that had carried her through the last decade, efficient and focused and in forward motion, and she handled all 3 things before the traffic broke. But when she got home that night and stood in her kitchen that was large and clean and absolutely silent, she noticed the silence in a way she hadn't before. She wasn't sure what to do with that. So she made tea and read a brief and went to bed. And if she thought, before she fell asleep, about a kitchen that was small and warm and had a window that let the morning in sideways, well, that was just a thought. People had thoughts. It didn't have to mean anything. She came back the week after that. And the week after that. By the 4th visit, she had stopped inventing reasons. She didn't tell Marcus she had a client in the area. She told him she'd be unreachable for the day, which she never did, and she drove up on a Saturday, which was the first Saturday she'd taken completely off in approximately 11 months. It rained that day. Hard, steady rain that drummed on the metal roof of the garage and turned the gravel lot into something that glittered under the security light Carter left on by the entrance. They sat on overturned crates in the open bay door. Not inside, because there was something about the smell of rain and motor oil and the gray afternoon that made being inside feel wrong. And drank coffee and talked for 3 hours. He told her about a book he'd read, something about the history of mechanical engineering, and she told him about the logistics software she'd built and the problem she'd been trying to solve and why the problem had interested her. He asked questions that proved he'd been listening, not just waiting for her to finish so he could talk again. She told him about her mother briefly, in a way she didn't usually tell people things, and he didn't make it into a moment. He just heard it. "You don't have a lot of people you talk to, do you?" he said at some point. She thought about being offended. Then she thought about whether he was wrong. "I have a lot of people around me," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she said. "It's not." The rain kept coming. A car splashed through a puddle on the road out front, its headlights sweeping briefly through the bay. "Why do you keep coming out here?" he asked. Not accusatory, just honest. The same honesty she'd come to expect from him, matter of fact and without agenda. She looked at the rain. "I don't know," she said, and then, because he deserved better than that. "Because it's different. Here, you're different." She paused. "I can breathe here." He was quiet for a moment. "You can breathe in New York." "You know what I mean?" "Yeah," he said. "I do." He didn't say anything else about it, and she didn't either, and they sat and listened to the rain until Lily's voice came from the back. "Daddy, can we have soup?" And he got up, and that was that. But something had shifted in the air between them, small and real, like a frequency that had been slightly off and had just moved into alignment. Vanessa felt it. She was almost certain he did too. She had never been good at wanting things she wasn't sure she could have. It was a fault she'd identified in herself early and never fully corrected, because identifying a fault and fixing it were completely separate skills, and she was excellent at the former and mediocre at the latter. The things she could have, companies, numbers, outcomes that responded to effort and strategy, those she wanted clearly and pursued directly. But anything that depended on someone else's willingness, someone else's feelings, someone else's choice, she had always found a way to move adjacent to those things without fully committing to the wanting. Because if you didn't fully want it, you couldn't fully lose it. She drove home that Saturday night and tried to work. She opened her laptop and looked at the report her COO had sent and read the same paragraph 3 times and understood none of it, which was not something that happened to her, not even when she was sick or jet-lagged or running on 3 hours of sleep. She closed the laptop. She sat in her kitchen, the large, clean, silent one, and thought about a man who made eggs on low heat and listened to his daughter's dreams about talking dogs, and had never once in any of their conversations asked her what she was worth. Because it's different. Here, you're different. She hadn't meant to say it quite like that, but she had said it. And he had said, "Yeah, I do. Not you're welcome or glad you like it here or anything that kept it light, but yeah, I do." Which meant he understood what she meant, and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She sat with that for a long time. Outside, Manhattan moved at its usual speed. 23 floors below, the city was doing what it always did. Relentless, indifferent, bright in every direction. She had always found it galvanizing. The energy of it, the scale of it. Tonight it just seemed loud. She got up and made tea and went to bed and stared at the ceiling, and the ceiling gave her nothing. And eventually, somewhere after midnight, she fell asleep to the thought of rain on a metal roof and rain on a gravel lot and a child asking for soup in the voice of someone who fully expected to be heard. She started noticing small things. That was the problem with paying attention. Once you started, you couldn't stop. You began collecting details the way you used to collect data points, except these didn't fit into any spreadsheet she'd ever built, and she wasn't sure what to do with them once she had them. She noticed that Carter drank his coffee black and let it go cold before he finished it, always, because something else would interrupt him. A customer, a question from Lily, a part that needed checking, and he'd come back to it 20 minutes later without complaint. She noticed that he kept a small notebook in his back pocket, not a phone, an actual paper notebook with a soft cover, and he wrote in it sometimes with a stub of pencil he kept behind his ear, brief notations she never looked at because they weren't hers to look at. She noticed that when he was thinking through something difficult, he had a habit of going very still, not the stillness of someone who'd checked out, but the opposite. Someone who had gone somewhere entirely interior and was working through the problem in a place where noise couldn't reach. She noticed that he was careful with her in a way she didn't have a name for. Not delicate, not deferential, just careful, the way you were careful with something that mattered without making a production of the mattering. She didn't know what to do with that either. By the 6th visit, she had stopped counting at some point and then started again, which told her something she was trying not to look at directly. She had developed a loose routine. She drove up on Saturday mornings, usually arriving around 10. Carter would be working. Lily would be around, either helping in ways that were mostly decorative or occupied with something in the back. Vanessa would get coffee from the machine in the office, and eventually they'd end up in conversation, and time would do the thing it had started doing, where it moved differently than it moved everywhere else in her life. In New York, time was granular. She tracked it in 15-minute increments, sometimes less. Every hour had a purpose attached to it, a deliverable, a call, a decision that needed to be made before the next one arrived. She had built her entire professional life on the premise that time was the only resource you couldn't manufacture more of, which meant it had to be allocated with the same rigor you'd apply to capital. At the garage, time went somewhere. An hour passed and it felt like 30 minutes, and not because she wasn't present, she was more present than she'd been in years, but because the hour wasn't being consumed by anything. It was just being used to sit and talk and listen to rain on metal or gravel under tires, or Lily explaining at length her evolving theory on which dinosaurs would have made the best pets. Ankylosaur, Lily said, on the Saturday in mid-June, with the conviction of someone who had given this serious thought. Because it's slow, so it wouldn't run away, and the shell thing on its back would be good for putting stuff on, like a table. A table, Carter repeated. He was changing the oil on a Honda Civic and couldn't fully see her from under the hood, but he was tracking the conversation. He was always tracking. For snacks, Lily clarified. Vanessa was sitting on the overturned milk crate she'd come to think of as hers. What about the tail? She asked. The tail had a club on it. Wouldn't it knock things over? Lily frowned. This was clearly new information she was processing. Maybe you just train it not to use the tail. Can you train an ankylosaur? You can train anything, Lily said with absolute confidence. You just have to be patient and use treats. She's not wrong, Carter said from somewhere inside the Honda's engine. She's completely wrong, Vanessa said, in the most charming possible way. Lily looked at her with the expression she made when she was deciding whether something was a compliment or not. Then she apparently decided it was and went back to her drawing. There were moments like that strung through the Saturdays like beads. Small and warm, and without any particular significance, except that Vanessa kept them. She turned them over in her head on the drive home, not analyzing them exactly, just carrying them. The same way you carried a stone you'd picked up on a walk, not because you needed it, but because it had fit right in your palm. She was running out of explanations for herself. The ones she'd started with, curiosity, a change of pace, it's good to get out of the city, had worn thin without her noticing. She'd used them past the point of usability, the way you used an argument past the point where even you believed it. And the thing underneath them, the thing she'd been not looking at for weeks, was becoming harder to avoid. She liked him. Not liked him the way she'd liked Aaron, who had been exciting and quick and who she'd been attracted to in a way that was immediate and obvious, and ultimately, she understood now, largely based on the fact that he was operating at the same velocity she was. With Aaron, it had been like looking in a mirror and feeling warmed by the reflection. With Carter, it was different. He wasn't her reflection. He was something else entirely, quieter, steadier, operating from a completely different set of premises about what mattered and how to spend a day. And she was drawn to that, to the difference of him, in a way that was less like attraction and more like... She kept reaching for the right word, and the word that kept coming back was gravity. Like he was creating a field and she kept getting pulled into it without entirely meaning to, which was either something worth paying attention to or something worth walking away from before it got complicated. She was not, historically, good at walking away from interesting problems. That, she suspected, was either very relevant or completely beside the point. On a Thursday in the third week of June, she called the garage. She'd gotten the number from the website, a very basic website, dark blue background, plain text, phone number, hours, a list of services, and she sat in her office on the 23rd floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan and called a garage in upstate New York in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, which was the kind of thing she didn't do. He picked up on the fourth ring. She could hear the background noise of the shop. Carter Automotive. It's Vanessa, she said. A half-second pause. Hey, I wanted to let you know I'll be up this Saturday. There's a noise the Audi's been making that I want you to look at. She paused. It's probably nothing, but... Silence for a moment. Then quietly, is the noise real? She looked out the window at the Midtown skyline. It's a little real, she said. More real than last time. She could feel him deciding something, or maybe she was imagining that, projecting, reading too much into a phone call that might have been a phone call and nothing more. Come around 10, he said. Okay. Lily's been asking about you. She wants to show you something she made at school. What is it? She won't tell me. I think she's saving it for maximum impact. Vanessa smiled at her window. I'll be there at 10. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Her COO had an update meeting at 2. She had a call with their outside counsel at 3:30. She had a pitch presentation to review before the board meeting the following Tuesday. She opened her laptop and pulled up the review doc, but for about 60 seconds she just looked at the city instead, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once, which was not a mode she usually operated in, and finding it, for the first time in a while, not unpleasant. The Audi made a noise that Saturday that was, in Vanessa's honest assessment, probably real about 40% of the time. Carter found a loose heat shield and fixed it in 20 minutes and didn't charge her for it. And she made a contribution to his coffee fund that was probably 20 times what a coffee fund needed. And they both pretended that was normal. And then they spent the rest of the morning doing what they always did. Lily showed her the project. It was a family portrait, made in art class, rendered in tempera paint on a piece of cardboard. There was a large figure with dark hair labeled Daddy, and a small figure with a ponytail labeled Me, and a third figure at the edge of the frame, tall, in what was clearly meant to be a blazer, with yellow hair, labeled simply V. Vanessa looked at the painting for a moment. "That's me?" she said. "You're tall," Lily said, a little defensively. "I tried to get the hair right." "The hair's very good." Vanessa looked at Carter, who was looking at the painting with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Lily, this is really lovely." "I used a lot of yellow," Lily said. "Mrs. Pacheco said I was generous with the yellow." "She was," Carter confirmed. "Very generous." "Are you going to keep it?" Lily asked Vanessa. "You can have it if you want. I made one for home, too." Vanessa looked at the small painting. She owned art that had cost more than some people's houses. She had a Basquiat on her living room wall that her art consultant had selected with scientific precision and that she never looked at anymore because it had become part of the room. "I would really like to have this," she said, and meant it completely. She drove home with the painting on the passenger seat, propped against the seatbelt so it wouldn't slide. She'd wrapped it in one of the shop rags Carter had handed her without comment, and the painting leaned against the seat the whole 2 hours back to the city, and she kept not quite looking at it and looking at it anyway. It was on her refrigerator by Sunday morning. Her refrigerator, which was stainless steel and custom paneled and had never had anything on it before. She stood in her kitchen and drank her coffee and looked at the painting and the 3 figures in it. Tall father, small daughter, tall visitor in a blazer with generous yellow hair, and thought quietly that this was probably the most honest portrait anyone had ever made of her, because a 6-year-old had no reason to be anything other than exactly what she saw. 2 weeks later, something shifted. It was a Saturday that had started ordinary. Coffee, Lily's ongoing research into the feasibility of pet velociraptors, Carter working on an old Subaru that belonged to a retired teacher named Mrs. Fleming, who Carter clearly had a lot of time for. Vanessa had been sitting in the office reading a brief on her laptop when she heard Lily, from somewhere in the back, make a sound that was not the usual sound. Not upset exactly, more startled, and then just before Carter's footsteps crossed the shop floor, a sharp intake of breath. She closed the laptop. She heard Carter's voice, low and steady. Hey, what happened?" "I fell," Lily said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who was trying very hard not to cry and losing. "I was trying to get the big book, and the step stool slipped, and I hit my elbow." "Let me see." A pause. "Okay, it's just scraped. Not bad. It hurts." "I know. Come here." More sounds. The run of water from a faucet. Carter's voice, still low, explaining what he was doing as he cleaned it. Not narrating for performance, but because Lily did better when she knew what was coming, Vanessa had noticed this before. The quiet negotiation of a child who was 4 years into understanding that, when things hurt, her father showed up. Vanessa stayed at the desk. She stayed there because she was a guest here, and this was not her moment to insert herself into. But she sat there and listened to Carter with his hurt daughter, the patience in his voice and the steadiness, and felt something in her chest move in a way that didn't have a clinical name. When Lily came out 10 minutes later with a bandage on her elbow, In a look of recovered dignity, she sat next to Vanessa and said, without preamble, "Daddy kissed it. He says that works, but I don't think that's scientifically proven." "It might not be," Vanessa said. "Does it feel better, though?" Lily considered. "Kind of." "Then maybe the mechanism doesn't matter." Lily looked at her. "That's like something he says." Vanessa looked up and Carter was in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, not saying anything, just watching the two of them. There was something on his face she couldn't name, something that was there and then was gone, replaced by the usual quiet and the usual steadiness. "You want lunch?" he said. It was the most ordinary question. She said yes. Lunch was sandwiches that were made without ceremony. He pulled things out of the refrigerator and built them like he was solving a problem, efficiently and without fuss, and Lily provided commentary on the correct ratio of mustard to everything else, which Carter ignored in a way that made Lily inform him that mustard was a superfood, which he also ignored. And Vanessa sat at the small kitchen table and ate a turkey sandwich on bread that wasn't fancy, and found it one of the better sandwiches she'd had in recent memory, which said something she wasn't ready to think about too hard. After Lily went to change because she'd gotten mustard on her shirt, the kitchen went quiet. Carter was at the sink. She was still at the table. The afternoon light had shifted to the kind that made things look slightly golden, which was either meaningful or just the angle of the sun at 2:15 in June, and she was not going to make it symbolic. "She likes you," Carter said, not looking at her, looking at the window above the sink. "I like her," Vanessa said. "She's easy to like." "She's not easy," he said. "She's genuinely a lot." But there was nothing negative in it, just accuracy. "She's a lot in a good way." He was quiet for a moment, then, "She hasn't, since her mom died, she's been careful about who she gets attached to." He turned the water off and stood with his hands on the edge of the sink. "She had a teacher in preschool she got really close to, and when the school year ended, she went quiet for a couple weeks. She didn't say anything about it, but I knew. Kids her age can't really process it." Vanessa set down her water glass. "How old was she when her mother died?" "Almost 2. He turned around and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms the way he did when he was saying something he'd thought through. "She doesn't really remember her. She knows the stories. She has the pictures, but the actual person, the real memory of her. No. That's..." Vanessa stopped. She was going to say that's hard, which was true and also inadequate. "She talks about it sometimes, actually. Lily does. Not in a heavy way. She mentioned once that she had a mommy who lived in the sky, which I assumed was..." "Something she decided," Carter said. "I didn't tell her that. She came up with it, around age 4. He looked at the floor for a moment. "I didn't correct it. I didn't know how to without making it worse. I think that was right. I don't know if it was right. I just know I couldn't say the right thing, so I said nothing. There was a weight to that. Not dramatic, not performed, just real. The weight of a man who had made 100 small decisions in the dark, without a handbook, trying not to break something that needed protecting." "She seems okay," Vanessa said quietly. "She seems genuinely okay." "Most days." He met her eyes. "Most days she's more than okay. She's incredible, honestly. She came out of something terrible, and she's this person who draws dinosaur families and argues about mustard and decides her own middle name. I don't think I made her that way. I think she just is." "That's not nothing, though, what you did." He looked at her for a moment, not accepting it exactly, but not dismissing it. "No," he said. "I know." Lily came back in wearing a clean shirt and announced that she wanted to go to the park and look for frogs, which brought the conversation to a close with the efficiency only a 6-year-old could manage. And Carter untucked himself from the counter and started looking for appropriate footwear, and Vanessa helped Lily locate a shoe that had somehow ended up behind the recycling bin, and by the time they were standing in the lot ready to go, the weight of the kitchen had settled into something lighter. They walked to the park down the road, the 3 of them, Carter and Lily and Vanessa, who was wearing the flat travel shoes that had become her de facto upstate footwear. And Lily found 2 frogs and named both of them immediately, and one escaped before she could get a good look, and she was philosophical about this in a way that seemed to suggest she understood that not everything stayed. Vanessa walked beside Carter, and Lily walked ahead of them both, narrating the frog situation to nobody in particular, and the afternoon was warm and the town was quiet, and there were dandelions in the grass at the edge of the path that nobody had mowed yet, and Vanessa felt the specific sensation of being somewhere that had nothing to prove. She didn't reach for anything, she just walked. That night, an hour into the drive back to the city, her phone rang through the car speakers. It was Diane Cho, her COO. And normally, Vanessa would have picked up immediately because Diane didn't call on Saturdays unless it mattered. She looked at the name on the dashboard screen for 2 full rings. Then she picked up. "Tell me," she said. And she went back to being Vanessa Holloway, exactly as she always was. But she drove home with the window cracked, which she never did on the highway, and the night air came in at the same angle it always did, and it smelled like nothing in particular, and she let it. The following Monday, she was in her office by 7, and in 4 back-to-back calls by 8, and reviewing term sheets by 11, and by the time her assistant brought in the afternoon coffee, she had processed approximately 9,000 pieces of information and made roughly 40 decisions and not thought about frogs or warm kitchen light or men who leaned against counters and said hard, true things without making a production of them. Except she had. Underneath all of it, the way you heard music playing in another room, you weren't listening exactly, but it was there. Her CFO, a very sharp woman named Renata, who had been with her for 6 years and had the quality of a person who understood more than she said, found her at her desk at 5:30 that evening after everyone else had gone. "You good?" Renata said. "Always," Vanessa said. Renata looked at the refrigerator through the glass of the office kitchen, visible from where they were standing, on which there was now a piece of cardboard in a child's temper colors, visible even from that distance because the yellow was, as advertised, extremely generous. "That's new," Renata said. "It was a gift." Renata waited for more. More did not come. "Okay," she said, in the tone of someone filing information for later. "It's nothing," Vanessa said. The words came out before she thought them, and they landed in the air between her and Renata, and she heard them exactly the way Renata did, which was as a direct and transparent contradiction of everything the painting on the refrigerator had been saying for the last week. Renata didn't point this out. She was too good at her job for that. "Have a good evening," she said, and left. Vanessa looked at the painting. The 3 figures looked back, Daddy and me and V. "It's not nothing," she said to the empty office. The office didn't argue. 3 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon at the end of June, she got a call she wasn't expecting. It was from a number she didn't recognize, and she almost let it go to voicemail, which she usually did with unknown numbers. She had picked up out of a reflex she couldn't fully explain, and a girl's voice said with great confidence, "Hi, this is Lily. I'm using Daddy's phone. Do you know how to get grass stains out of white shoes?" Vanessa blinked. "Why are you asking me?" "Because you know things," Lily said, with patient simplicity, as though this were self-evident. "Where's your dad?" "Fixing a car. He said not to bother him unless it's important." "And you think this is important?" "These are my good shoes. They have daisies on them." Vanessa pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment. She was in a meeting room, alone, waiting for a call that wasn't due to start for another 6 minutes. Outside the glass, her team moved through the open office in the way that teams did, purposeful and occupied. "Try white vinegar and dish soap," she said. "Soak a cloth in it. Work it in from the outside of the stain toward the middle. Don't scrub or you'll spread it. Let it sit for 10 minutes before you rinse." A pause. "Do we have white vinegar?" "It's usually in the back of the kitchen cabinet near things like baking soda." Rustling sounds, then the clatter of cabinet doors being opened. Vanessa listened to Lily searching the kitchen through the phone and felt something absurd and light moving through her, like carbonation, something she hadn't felt in an office in a very long time. "Found it," Lily said. "Good. Be careful with it near your eyes." "I'm not going to put it in my eyes. I'm not a baby." "I didn't say you were. I said be careful." "Okay." More sounds of purposeful movement, then, in a slightly different tone, quieter, less businesslike. "Are you coming this Saturday?" "I was planning on it, yes." "Good." And then, just before she hung up, The vinegar smells bad, just so you know. It does, Vanessa agreed, but it works. The call ended, and Vanessa sat in the meeting room for another 4 minutes before her conference call connected, and she thought about a child in a kitchen looking for vinegar in a cabinet because she had called someone she trusted with the problem. And she felt something uncomfortable and real and warm in the middle of her chest, and she didn't try to name it. She let it be what it was. The following Saturday, she arrived at 10 as always, and before she had fully stepped out of the car, Lily appeared at the bay door in white shoes with daisies on them, showing them off with the expression of someone presenting definitive evidence. "It worked," Lily announced. "Good. I had to do it twice. The first time I didn't let it sit long enough." She looked at the shoes critically. "There's still a little bit of a shadow, but Daddy says that's acceptable." "That's acceptable," Carter confirmed from inside the bay, without looking up. Lily looked at Vanessa. "Did you know that about the vinegar yourself, or did you look it up?" "I knew it," Vanessa said. "My mother used to use it. Old trick." Lily absorbed this. "What else do you know?" Vanessa looked at her. The morning was warm and the lot was already bright with it, and Lily was standing there in her clean shoes with complete, uncomplicated faith in Vanessa's knowledge of the world, and the trust of it landed somewhere soft. "A lot of things," Vanessa said, "most of which are significantly less useful than vinegar." Lily seemed to find this satisfying, and led her inside by the hand, which was something she'd started doing in the last few weeks. The physical casualness of a child who had decided you were safe, who didn't ask permission for the assumption, who simply acted on it the way children acted on certainties. Vanessa let herself be led. Carter watched them go inside, and if something crossed his face in the second she wasn't looking, something careful and wondering and a little afraid, there was no one there to see it. He went back to work. That evening, after Lily was asleep and the garage was quiet and Vanessa was sitting on the back step with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, Carter came and sat next to her. Not close enough to make it something, but close enough that she was aware of exactly how far away he was, which was its own kind of proximity. The sky out here was different from the city. She'd noticed it before, but it still surprised her. The density of it, the way the dark actually looked dark, rather than the ambient orange-gray of light-polluted urban night. They sat for a while without talking. Then Carter said, "I haven't done this in a long time." She looked at him. "Done what?" He thought about how to say it. She could see him finding the words, the same way she'd seen him find solutions, patiently, without rushing to the first answer. "Let someone in," he said. "To this. Here." He gestured slightly with his coffee cup, meaning the step, the yard, the quiet, the whole of it. "After Elena, after Lily's mom, I stopped." He said it plain, the way he said most things. "I told myself it was because of Lily, that I was protecting her from inconsistency, from people who might show up and then not show up, and that was part of it. But it was also just—" He stopped. "You didn't want to," Vanessa said. "I couldn't," he said. "There's a difference." She sat with that. "What changed?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the dark yard and the dark sky and whatever he was looking at inside himself. "You didn't try to fix anything," he said finally. "You didn't try to be anything. You just kept showing up." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were steady, but there was something behind the steadiness, something that was costing him something to say. "And Lily drew you into the picture. The painting, the three figures, V at the edge of the frame." Vanessa felt something shift in her chest that she'd been bracing against for weeks, the way you braced against a tide you'd been pretending wasn't coming. "Carter, I'm not asking you for anything," he said quickly, not pulling back but making sure she had room. "I'm just telling you that this, another gesture, that same encompassing motion, this means something to me, to her, and I thought you should know." The night was quiet around them. A cricket somewhere, the distant sound of a car on the highway 2 miles off, the creak of the building settling in the cooler air. "It means something to me too," she said, simply. Without the qualifications she would have attached to that sentence a year ago, without the careful architecture of self-protection she'd spent 15 years building. She said it and left it there, bare and real, the way he'd left his. He nodded, just once, like she'd confirmed something he'd been fairly sure of but needed to hear. And then they sat on the back step and drank their cold coffee and looked at the dark yard until there was nothing left in their cups. And then they went inside separately, and she slept in the small room she'd started thinking of as the guest room, because Carter had stopped suggesting the motel after the third Saturday. And the night was quiet, and she woke up at 6 to the sound of Lily telling her stuffed animals that it was too early to be awake, but they were going to have to deal with it. Vanessa lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and felt not happy exactly. It was more complicated than happy, but present, fully, uncomplicatedly present, which was, she was beginning to understand, its own kind of rare. The weeks after the back step had a texture to them that Vanessa didn't know how to describe to anyone, partly because she wasn't describing it to anyone, and partly because the texture was the kind that resisted language. Nothing dramatic had happened. That was the thing. He hadn't kissed her. She hadn't made any declarations beyond what she'd already made, which was itself barely a declaration. It means something to me too, quiet on a dark step, more confession than announcement. They hadn't defined anything, which she suspected was deliberate on both their parts. Two people who had learned through different disasters that naming a thing too early was its own kind of jinx. But something had changed in the architecture of the Saturdays. There was less performance, if there'd ever been any. Less of the low-grade awareness she'd carried in those first weeks of what does he think of me and how do I seem right now. They moved around each other differently. He handed her things, a mug, a tool he needed passed without asking, once Lily's jacket that had been left on the wrong chair, with the unconscious ease of someone who had stopped factoring in the distance between them. She noticed. She kept noticing. She was becoming, she understood, somewhat useless at not noticing things about Daniel Carter. His name was Daniel, which she'd known from the sign and from Lily saying it sometimes in the precise, formal way children said parent names when they were making a point. But she'd been thinking of him as Carter for so long that Daniel felt like a different person, a more personal one. She started using it sometime in mid-July, testing it, and he'd looked at her the first time with an expression she couldn't fully read and then said nothing about it, which she interpreted as permission. July in the small town was different from July in the city. The heat had a different quality up here, not the wet, dense heat of Manhattan in summer, trapped between buildings and released from pavement in visible waves, but something broader and more honest, the kind that came with actual shade under actual trees. The festival Carter had mentioned, the one Lily liked for the parade, happened the second weekend, and Vanessa was there for it, which was not something she'd planned and also was not something that surprised her because she'd been there the Saturday before and Lily had looked at her over breakfast and said, with the gravity of a small person issuing a formal invitation, "You should stay for the parade." And Vanessa had looked at Carter. Carter had looked at his coffee. "It's your call?" he'd said, which was a genuinely neutral statement that she had interpreted as something other than neutral, and she'd called Marcus to move her Sunday morning call, which Marcus had done without comment, and she'd stayed. The parade was objectively not very large. A high school marching band, a few flatbed floats with local businesses, someone's tractor decorated with streamers, 3 dogs in coordinated costumes whose owner was clearly very committed to the bit. Lily watched it from Carter's shoulders, which was where she'd installed herself approximately 30 seconds after they'd found a spot on the sidewalk, and she provided live commentary on every element with an authority that Vanessa found deeply entertaining. "That dog's costume is better than that dog's costume," Lily declared, pointing. "They're both good," Carter said. "No, that one," pointing left, "has a hat. The other one just has a jacket. A hat is harder." "She's not wrong," Vanessa said. "Don't encourage the hierarchy," Carter said. "She already has a hierarchy. I'm just acknowledging it." Lily looked down at her from her perch with the pleased expression of someone who felt understood. Afterward, there was food. Actual food. Not festival food exactly. Just the diner that was open late because of the event. A place called Ruby's with sticky vinyl booths and a pie case near the door that Lily inspected with the seriousness of someone making an important investment. They got a booth in the corner and Lily ordered cherry pie and then changed her order to apple and then asked if she could have 1 slice of each, and Carter said no. And she made a measured case for why variety was nutritionally important, and he said no again, and she chose apple. You make that look easy, Vanessa said. What? The no. Saying it and meaning it and not, she doesn't fight it for long. I've seen parents. She stopped because she was about to say something that sounded like she'd been studying this, which she had, a little. Some kids go longer on the negotiation. Carter wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. She used to. Around 3, 4, she'd go for 10, 15 minutes on some things. Bedtime especially. He looked at Lily, who was studying the paper placemat with intense focus. But I figured out early that the only way she'd believe the no was if I actually meant it every time. Kids know when you're just saying it to end the argument, and then the no means nothing. Yeah. Vanessa turned her own cup slowly. I do that. In negotiations, if you signal that a no is negotiable, people stop hearing it as a position and start hearing it as an opening bid. He looked at her. That's exactly it. Parenting and deal-making, she said. Not so different. Probably shouldn't tell her that. Definitely not. Lily looked up from her placemat, which she had apparently been converting into a tic-tac-toe board. Do you want to play? Sure, Carter said. Not you, Lily said. Vanessa. Carter made a face of exaggerated offense. I'm right here. You always win, Lily said, the patience of someone explaining a very simple thing. I want to play someone I can beat. Vanessa accepted the pencil. She did not let Lily win on purpose. She considered it for approximately 1 second and then decided that Lily would know and it would bother her, which was the right call, because Lily played with real strategic intent and managed to beat her on the third game fair, at which point she folded her arms on the table and rested her chin on them with an expression of profound satisfaction. I won, she said. You did, Vanessa agreed. You're not bad, Lily said generously. You just didn't see the corner. I didn't, Vanessa said. Good catch. Carter was watching both of them with the expression she'd started cataloging internally as the one he made when he wasn't going to say what he was thinking, which happened regularly, and which she found equal parts endearing and frustrating, because she was someone who generally preferred to know what was in people's heads. The pie came. Lily ate it with the focused pleasure of someone who had made the right choice and knew it. The diner hummed around them. Other families, couples, a few people from the parade in town t-shirts, the ordinary, comfortable noise of a place that had been feeding people for decades. Vanessa looked around at the sticky booths and the pie case and the waitress who called everyone Han without it feeling performative, and thought about how many places she'd eaten in the last year. Restaurants that took 3 months to get reservations, places where the food was engineering more than cooking, and how this, the cherry red vinyl and the apple pie and the tic-tac-toe on the placemat, felt more like dinner than any of them. She said none of this. It would have sounded like she was contrasting things for effect, performing a revelation, and she wasn't. She was just eating and noticing. They walked back to the garage in the warm evening, Lily between them holding one hand of each because she'd decided this was how walking worked, and the town was settling into its post-festival quiet, and Vanessa thought, for the first time in her life without ambivalence, that she would like this particular evening to be longer than it was. That was in July. In August, things got harder. Not between them. Between them was quieter now, steadier, that careful something that was neither fully named nor fully unnamed. Harder in the other direction. Harder because Vanessa's world had a way of reasserting itself. Her company was in the middle of a significant acquisition. She'd been building toward it for 18 months, a sustainable packaging manufacturer out of Portland that she'd identified early as undervalued and strategically aligned with her existing portfolio. The process should have been manageable, but the founders were complicated. The due diligence had surfaced issues that required restructuring, and her outside counsel had started sending emails at 1 a.m, which was never a good sign. She went 3 Saturdays without going upstate. The first one, she'd called Carter on Friday evening to tell him. I'm not going to make it this weekend, she said. The acquisition's hitting a rough patch. I'll be in working sessions through Sunday. Okay, he said. I'm sorry. She didn't usually apologize for work. I'll be there the following Saturday. We'll be here. A beat. Lily's going to want to know what I told you that warranted an apology. Tell her it was about mustard. She heard the not quite a smile. The second Saturday, she didn't call until Saturday itself at 7 in the morning from her office where she'd already been for 2 hours. It was a shorter conversation, tighter at the edges. She was distracted, and he could tell, and she didn't have the energy to pretend otherwise. Go, he said. Handle it. I'll call this week. To Lily, I mean. If she asks about the vinegar thing. She'll be fine, he said. Vanessa, go handle your thing. She went. She handled it. The third Saturday, she didn't call at all, not intentionally. The weekend collapsed into itself. The acquisition hit its worst point on Friday afternoon when the lead founder threatened to pull out entirely over a compensation clause, and Vanessa spent Friday night in a conference room with her legal team rebuilding the offer structure from a different angle, and Saturday became an extension of Friday, and then Sunday became an extension of Saturday, and she surfaced on Sunday evening with a deal that was saved but not signed, and a phone full of messages she'd been triaging all weekend, and she saw Carter's name in the missed calls and felt something fall in her stomach. One call. No voicemail. She called back. It rang 4 times, and she was already constructing the voicemail in her head when he picked up. Hey, he said. I'm sorry, she said immediately. The deal went sideways, and It's fine. The way he said it was not quite flat, but was not quite warm. It's not fine, she said. I should have called. You had a situation. Carter. She was in her car in the parking garage under her building, and the concrete around her was the specific gray of things that had never been anything else. I should have called. Silence for a moment, then, Yeah, he said. You should have. Not angry, but honest. He was always honest. How's Lily? She's okay. She asked about you on Saturday. I told her you had work. What did she say? She said work was stupid. Then she went and played with her dinosaurs. He paused. She's fine. She's resilient. I know she is. Vanessa looked at her own hands on the steering wheel. Are you? A long beat. I'm not built like I was at 25, he said, and that was all he said. And she understood it completely. Not a complaint, not a demand, just information. A statement of where he was. He was someone who had lost someone, who had rebuilt around protecting himself and his daughter from exactly this kind of irregular presence. And the thing they'd been building on the Saturdays was based on consistency, on showing up, on the particular promise that a recurring thing made without words. And she'd broken 3 in a row without warning. I hear you, she said quietly. I know you have a life, Carter said. I know what it looks like. I'm not asking you to restructure it. He stopped. I need to know that when you're not here, it's because you're not here, not because you forgot. I didn't forget. I know. And somehow that made it more complicated. That's not the same thing as choosing. The parking garage hummed around her. Somewhere below, a car started. The sound of the exhaust bounced off concrete in a way that was completely indifferent to what was happening in the silence between her and the man on the phone. I'm going to be there next Saturday, she said. Okay. I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. And there was something in that, I know you mean it, that sounded like it hurt, or like the meaning it was exactly the complicated part. And she sat with that long after she'd said goodnight and gone upstairs and stood in her kitchen and looked at the painting on the refrigerator. She was there the following Saturday. She drove up earlier than usual, arrived at 9, and Carter looked at her when she got out of the car in a way that was assessing but not unkind, like he was checking to see which version of her had arrived. She stood in the gravel lot. I'm here, she said, simply. Yeah, he said, you are. Lily appeared at the bay door before the silence could become something else. She was wearing the shoes with the daisies on them and holding a piece of paper with what appeared to be a very complex diagram on it. I've been working on the dinosaur business plan, she announced. There are problems. There usually are, Vanessa said, and went inside. The week after that, the acquisition closed. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, and Vanessa was in her conference room with her team when the final signatures came through. And there was the usual moment, the one she'd had a version of after every major deal, The particular mix of relief and exhaustion and satisfaction that was never quite as clean as the anticipation of it. Her team opened a bottle of champagne that someone had stashed in the mini fridge in anticipation. Her COO hugged her, which Renata almost never did, and which meant the deal had been more stressful for everyone than anyone had admitted. Vanessa drank half a glass of champagne and then stepped out onto the small terrace off the conference room and called Carter. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear the shop in the background. "It closed," she said. "The deal?" "Yeah. How do you feel?" She looked out over the city the way she had 100 times, the skyline doing what it always did, relentless and bright. "Tired," she said, which was not the answer she would have given a year ago. A year ago, she would have said good or ready for the next one. "That's honest," he said. "I've been trying that." She heard a sound that might have been him putting down a wrench. "Lily got a gold star on her reading this week. She's been making me address her as Gold Star Lily since Thursday." Vanessa closed her eyes and leaned on the railing. "As she should. She'd want to tell you herself. She's going to be annoyed you already know." "Then don't tell her I called. That's a conspiracy." "Those work." She heard his almost laugh. "Come this Saturday," he said. "We're going apple picking. There's a place about 20 minutes out." Lily decided. She decided. She decided in the way where I don't remember agreeing to it, but apparently I did. Vanessa smiled at the Manhattan skyline. "I'll be there." She was. The apple orchard was everything Lily had promised, which meant it had a lot of trees and a donkey that you could pet for $1 and a barn with cider, and a woman at the entrance who gave Lily a canvas bag that was taller than she was. Lily took this in stride and began filling it immediately with the precision of someone running a procurement operation. Carter walked beside Vanessa through the rows of trees, and she kept thinking about how strange it was, the fact of all this, that she had driven 2 hours north to walk through an apple orchard on a Saturday because a 6-year-old had decided it was happening, and that she was not just okay with that, but grateful for it, grateful in the specific way you were grateful for things you hadn't known to want. "Can I ask you something?" Vanessa said. They were far enough down a row that Lily was visible but out of earshot, moving between trees with her enormous bag. "Yeah," Carter said. "When did you leave?" She kept her voice easy, without pressure. "The tech company." "When did you actually walk away?" A pause, not a long one. 3 months after Elena died, he said. I wasn't really running it anymore. People were covering. My COO and the board were essentially carrying the whole thing while I was dealing with the hospital, and then afterward with Lily. He stopped, picked up an apple that had fallen into the grass, turned it in his hands, set it down. "The company sold 8 months after. We'd already been in acquisition talks before. I just signed the papers and stopped." "Did you miss it?" He thought about this genuinely, which she'd come to expect from him. No automatic answer, no performed version of whatever sounded right. "The building part," he said. "I missed the problem solving. That specific thing where you've got an engineering problem and you don't know if it's solvable and you work it until it is." He watched Lily disappear behind a tree and reemerge. "The rest of it, the profiles, the meetings, all the performing you have to do when a company gets that big, the version of yourself you have to keep playing." He shook his head slightly. "No, I don't miss that." "I think about that," Vanessa said. "Sometimes. The performing. You're good at it. That's not the same as not being tired of it." He looked at her sideways. "No, it's not." They walked a few more steps in silence. That was the easy kind. "I didn't want Lily to grow up in that," he said. "In that world. The one where everyone's always watching. There's a cost to that. I could feel it starting, and she was barely 2 years old." He stopped walking. "I wanted her to grow up somewhere she could find a frog and care about it because it was a frog, not because it was useful." Vanessa looked at him. "You gave up a lot for that," she said. "I gave up things," he said carefully. "Some of them I don't want back." Lily materialized from between 2 trees, holding an apple in each hand and examining them both critically. Which one? She called. The red one, Carter called back. They're both red. The redder one. Lily held them both up to the light with the gravity of a jeweler evaluating diamonds, then put one in the bag and bit into the other one immediately, which probably wasn't technically allowed. But the woman at the barn hadn't said anything specifically about that, and Lily had clearly decided that ambiguity operated in her favor. She's going to be a lawyer, Vanessa said. Or a judge, Carter said. Cuts out the middle step. They walked back toward the barn in the warm September afternoon, Lily between them again with her enormous canvas bag, occasionally offering one of them an apple she'd rejected for personal consumption, which was its own kind of generosity. Vanessa carried the bag when it got too heavy, and Carter carried Lily on his back for the last quarter mile when she announced that her legs were tired, and the afternoon folded in on itself the way good afternoons did, the specific warmth of a thing that was real and unhurried and not trying to be anything other than what it was. It was on the drive home from the orchard, Lily in the back of Carter's truck with her seatbelt on and her head already tilting toward sleep, that Vanessa's phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. Meridian Foundation Gala confirmed. September 28th. Black tie. You're listed as host. Reminder, you requested. She looked at the message. The Meridian Foundation Gala was a significant fixture in her world, a major charity event that she'd helped launch 5 years earlier, and that had become, in the years since, one of the more important evenings on the calendar of the kind of people who had that kind of calendar. She was always there. She hosted, occasionally she co-chaired, she gave a remarks segment that she prepared carefully and delivered well. It was not optional. It was, in the language of the world she operated in, a commitment. She put the phone away. Carter was watching the road. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She looked out the window at the passing trees, the particular gold of early September, and thought about the gala, and the 2 hours between here and the city, and the way these two parts of her life had been living in separate compartments, sealed from each other, clean, uncomplicated, and the degree to which that could hold. She was beginning to think it couldn't, not because either world was incompatible with the other, but because she was one person, and one person eventually ran out of ways to keep things compartmentalized. You became the whole of yourself whether you wanted to or not. The city, and the garage, and the orchard, and the board meetings, and the painting on the refrigerator, all of it was the same life, and she had been treating it like it wasn't. She didn't know what it meant to stop treating it that way, but the thought was there now, and she'd never been good at unthinking things. The gala was on a Saturday. She realized this 2 weeks later, pulling it up on her calendar to review the timeline, and sat for a moment with that fact. Her Saturdays had not had conflicts in 4 months. She had, without fully deciding to, protected them in the way she protected very few things. Not by announcing the protection, just by not allowing incursions. She'd shifted calls, moved dinners, declined 2 event invitations that had landed on Saturday dates. Marcus had started scheduling around them without being told, because Marcus paid attention. But she had hosted this gala for 5 years. There were 200 people attending. Her name was on the program. She thought about calling Carter and telling him she wouldn't be there that Saturday. And then she thought about what he'd said quietly in a parking garage on a Sunday night. That's not the same thing as choosing. She sat with that for a while. Then she called her event coordinator and asked a question that would have seemed insane to her 12 months ago. Could she arrange a +2 for the gala? "Of course," the coordinator said. "Who should I list?" Vanessa thought about the 2 people who would be arriving in Carter's truck, and about an evening that had always been hers, and about a 6-year-old who had never in her life been anywhere near a ballroom. "I'll give you the names this week," she said. She called Carter that evening. "I have something on the 28th, she said. "The Saturday. A charity event in the city. I host it every year. It's black tie." She paused. "I'd like you to come." Silence. She let it exist. "Both of us?" he said. "Both of you," she said. "There will be other kids there. People bring their families." This was true, though it was not the primary nature of the event. Another silence, longer this time. "Vanessa," he said slowly. "I don't—" He stopped, started again. "I stepped away from that world for a reason. I know. These events, the people at them, I know some of them, personally, from before. His voice was careful and level. It's not. It's complicated. For me. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to go back to anything. I'm asking you to come to one evening. With Lily. With Lily. She heard him exhale. Let me think, he said. Okay. She didn't push it. She put the phone down and went to look at the painting on her refrigerator, the three figures with the generous yellow hair, and she thought about what she was actually asking, which was not just come to a party, but something more structural than that. She was asking him to let the two halves of her life look at each other, which was something she hadn't fully understood until just now was what she wanted. She wanted Daniel Carter to stand in her world the way she'd been standing in his. Not permanently, not as a solution to anything, just to see it. To know what it was she came from when she came to him. He called back the next evening. Lily wants to know if there will be a fancy dessert table, he said, without preamble. Vanessa's chest loosened. There will be a very fancy dessert table, she said. Then she says yes. A beat. I say yes too. Okay, Vanessa said, and kept her voice even, which required a small effort. I'm going to need to borrow Lily's dinosaur business plan energy to get through this, he said. You'll be fine, she said. You don't actually know that. No, she said. I don't, but I'll be there. He was quiet for a moment, and she didn't try to fill it. Yeah, he said, finally. Okay. The date was set. September 28th, black tie. A ballroom in Midtown Manhattan, where Vanessa Holloway had hosted events for 5 years running, where 200 people from the particular world she inhabited would be eating and drinking and networking with the smooth efficiency of people who had been doing this their entire adult lives. Where Daniel Carter was going to walk in wearing a suit after 4 years in a small town, and the world he'd left was going to be waiting on the other side of those doors. And he didn't know yet, she didn't know yet, what was on the other side of that, for either of them. She didn't sleep well the 2 weeks before. She told herself it was the event logistics, the seating charts, the remarks she hadn't finished writing, the usual friction of putting 200 influential people in a room and managing what emerged. But she knew, lying in her large, quiet apartment with the city moving below, that it was something else. She was afraid. Not of the gala. She'd been doing the gala for 5 years and she could run it in her sleep. She was afraid of what September 28th was going to ask of both of them, of what it would reveal, of what Carter would see when he walked into that room, and of what she would see on his face when he saw it, and of whether whatever they'd been building on Saturdays would survive contact with the other 5 days of the week. She was afraid, she understood, because it mattered. She had spent a long time making sure things didn't matter enough to be afraid of losing. That clearly was no longer working. The suit had been in the back of his closet for 4 years. Carter found it on a Wednesday evening after Lily was asleep, standing in front of the small closet in his bedroom with a flashlight because the overhead bulb had burned out and he hadn't replaced it yet. He moved aside the work shirts and the flannels and the 2 good sweaters he owned, and there it was, charcoal gray, Italian wool, the kind of suit that had been made for a body that had spent its days in conference rooms rather than under cars. He took it out and held it up and looked at it for a moment in the flashlight beam. It still fit. He tried it on in the bathroom mirror because the bedroom mirror had Lily's sticker collection on the lower half, and he couldn't see himself properly. It fit across the shoulders, a little looser in the waist than it used to be. The years of actual physical work had changed his body in ways that no amount of time in a corporate gym had. The pants needed pressing. The shirt that went with it was still in the dry cleaning bag it had come back in, the last time he'd worn it, which was a company dinner in the fall before Elena died. He stood in the bathroom in the expensive suit and looked at himself and tried to locate what he felt. Strange was the word. Not bad. Just strange. Like trying on a language he'd once been fluent in and discovering it came back faster than he expected, which was either reassuring or unsettling, and he hadn't decided which. He took it off and hung it on the bathroom door and went to make himself a cup of tea, which he usually didn't do, but tonight felt right, and he sat at the kitchen table in the small, warm kitchen and thought about the 28th. He'd said yes. He'd meant the yes, but meaning it and being ready for it were not the same thing, and he was aware, in the way he was aware of most things about himself, quietly, without excessive drama, that he was not entirely ready for what Saturday was going to ask of him. He knew some of the people who would be at that gala. He'd done business with them, raised capital from some of them, competed against a few. His company had been covered in 3 national publications before he sold it, and the sale itself had been covered in more. He had, for approximately 4 years of his life, been exactly the kind of person who attended evenings like the one Vanessa was hosting. He knew how they worked. He knew the choreography, the specific way people moved through those rooms, the economy of eye contact, the art of being seen without seeming to try to be seen. He'd been good at it. That was the part he sat with now, in his kitchen, at 10:30 at night. He hadn't hated it, exactly. He'd been good at it, and being good at something had its own momentum. You kept doing it because you were effective at it, and being effective felt like reason enough. It wasn't until the structure of his life had collapsed, the real structure, the one underneath the company and the capital and the press mentions, that he'd understood how much of what he'd called ambition had actually been motion without direction. Going fast enough that you didn't have to feel the gap between who you were and who you were performing. Elena had known that about him. She'd said it to him once, not unkindly, in the kitchen of the apartment they'd had in Philadelphia. You're going to work yourself down to nothing and then be surprised there's nothing left to give me. He'd argued with her, told her she was wrong, that he was building something, that the work had a point, and the point was a life they were going to have on the other side of it. She'd looked at him with the expression she made when she'd already decided something and was waiting for him to catch up. She died before the catching up happened. He'd had 4 years since then to think about what she meant, and to try, imperfectly, to be something different in her absence. Not better. Better was too clean a word for what he'd been attempting. Just more honest. More actually present in his life rather than adjacent to it. The garage had helped, not in any symbolic way, but practically. The work demanded his hands and his attention simultaneously, and there was no room in it for performing anything. An engine either worked or it didn't. The honesty of that had been, in the first 2 years, basically the only thing keeping him level. Then Lily had started becoming herself, and she required a different kind of presence, and that had helped too. And then Vanessa had driven up a highway with a dead Porsche, and that was something else entirely. He sat in the kitchen and finished his tea and washed the mug, and went to look in on Lily, which he did every night, the same way every night. Open the door, check the breathing, adjust the blanket if it needed adjusting. She was flat on her back with her arms out to the sides, which was how she always slept, like someone falling from a great height and completely at peace with it. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She'd asked him that evening, while he was doing her hair for bed, whether Vanessa's party was going to be fancy or just regular fancy. He'd said probably fancy. She'd considered this with visible excitement and some concern, and then said with great seriousness that she was going to need to practice walking so she didn't trip if she had to wear good shoes. He'd spent 10 minutes watching her practice walking in the hallway in her socks, very upright, very deliberate, like someone carrying an invisible book on their head. He closed her door softly and went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time. The morning of the 28th, Vanessa sent a car. She hadn't asked if this was okay, which he'd noticed, but he understood why. Asking would have made it a question he might have said no to, and she knew that, and sending it anyway was her version of, I've thought about this, and I'm deciding it's taken care of. He recognized the move. He'd made versions of it himself, in another life. He let it go. Lily, when she saw the car, black, long, with a driver in a dark jacket, who opened the door without being asked, made a sound he'd never heard from her before. It was somewhere between a gasp and a squeal, and he would have found it embarrassing, except that the driver smiled at her with genuine warmth and said, "Your seat's in the back, miss." And Lily climbed in with the composure of someone who had been expecting this all along. Carter got in beside her. He was wearing the charcoal suit. He'd pressed the pants himself, twice, because the first time hadn't been right. The shirt was the one from the dry cleaning bag. He'd found a tie in the jacket pocket, dark blue, still knotted from the last time. and he'd unknotted it and reknotted it standing in the bathroom at 6 in the morning while Lily was still asleep. He looked, by any external measure, like the man he'd been 4 years ago. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. Lily was wearing a navy dress with small white dots that he'd bought 3 weeks ago after she'd gone very quiet in the store and stared at it with an expression he'd learned to read as, "I want this very badly, but I'm not going to ask." She was also wearing her Daisy shoes, which he'd decided not to argue about because she'd cleaned them herself with vinegar and dish soap, and they were, objectively, in good condition. And if Vanessa's gala couldn't accommodate Daisy's shoes, then that was the gala's problem. The drive to the city took 2 hours. Lily spent the first 40 minutes asking the driver questions. His name was Thomas. He'd been driving for 11 years. He had a daughter 2 years older than Lily. His favorite food was pasta. And then fell asleep against Carter's arm for the last 40 minutes, with her navy dress spread out around her and her mouth open slightly, which was deeply undignified and also exactly right. Carter watched the city approach through the tinted windows, the skyline doing its thing, assembling itself from the distance the way it always did, the particular aggression of it, all those buildings insisting on themselves. He'd always loved it once, the scale of New York, the way it made ambition feel normal. He looked at Lily sleeping against him. He hadn't brought her here in 4 years. He'd brought her once for a doctor's appointment that required a specialist when she was 3, but she didn't remember it. This was, effectively, her first New York. She was going to have opinions. Vanessa had arranged for them to arrive at her apartment first, which he appreciated. Getting Lily fed and changed and settled before the evening started was the practical move. And that she'd thought of it meant she'd been thinking about Lily's logistics the same way she thought about all logistics, carefully and in advance. The apartment building had a doorman who knew Carter's name, which was slightly startling, and an elevator that opened directly into the apartment, which Lily noticed and said, "It goes right into the house," with the tone of someone encountering an architectural innovation of great significance. Vanessa was in the living room when the elevator opened, wearing something dark blue that was elegant in the specific way of expensive things that didn't announce themselves. Her hair was different, up, in a way that looked like it had taken time. She looked like the woman he'd seen in newspaper profiles, polished and composed and completely controlled, except that when she saw them, when she saw Lily in the navy dress and the Daisy shoes, something came through the composure that was very much the other Vanessa, the Saturday one, and she said, "You look incredible," to Lily before she said anything else. Lily looked down at herself and then up at Vanessa. "Your hair is different." "It is." "I like it." Lily turned to Carter. "Daddy, her hair is different." "I can see that," Carter said. Vanessa looked at him then, for a moment that was just between them. There was something in it that was both, "I'm glad you're here, and how are you, actually?" And he held it for a second before answering the second question the same way he answered most things, with the truth or the useful part of it. "Nice place," he said. Her mouth curved. "Come in. There's food. Lily, are you hungry?" "Yes," Lily said immediately. "Also, your elevator goes right into your house." "It does." "We have stairs." "Stairs are good exercise," Vanessa said. "That's what Daddy says about everything that's inconvenient." Carter met Vanessa's eyes over Lily's head. She looked like she was exercising real restraint. The apartment was large and quiet and full of art and exactly what he'd expected from everything he'd understood about her life, and also somehow not what he'd expected, because there was a child's painting on the refrigerator that he recognized, and the painting looked absolutely natural there, more natural than the Basquiat on the living room wall. And he thought about what it meant that she'd put it there and kept it there, and had apparently been looking at it every morning when she got her coffee. He stood in the kitchen while Vanessa put together a plate for Lily, moving through the space with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything was. And Lily sat at the kitchen island and ate small sandwiches and interrogated Vanessa about the building's elevator system. And Carter leaned against the counter and thought, this is her life. All of it. The elevator and the art, and the 23rd floor, and the meetings and the acquisition and the gala tonight. This was what she came from when she came to him. He'd understood it abstractly. He understood it differently, standing in her kitchen. "You okay?" she said, quietly, while Lily was examining a particularly interesting sandwich. "Yeah," he said, "you don't have to stay the whole evening. I'm aware. I want you to know there's no obligation. You can, Vanessa." He looked at her steadily. "I said I'd be here. I'm here." She held his eyes for a moment. Then she nodded once and went back to the plate. The Meridian Foundation Gala was held in a ballroom in a midtown hotel that Vanessa had been in so many times it had the familiarity of a frequently visited office. The ceiling was high, the lighting was the specific warm gold of these events. The tables were set with the precision of people who had done this professionally for decades. They arrived 20 minutes before the doors opened for guests, which Vanessa needed for host responsibilities. She'd arranged for Lily and Carter to be seated at a table she described as lower pressure, with her assistant Marcus and his wife, a woman named Sylvia, who turned out to be a pediatric nurse and who, within approximately 6 minutes of sitting down, had become Lily's closest ally in the room. Carter sat at the table and watched the room fill. He recognized people. That was the thing he'd been bracing for, and that he now navigated in real time. The faces that had populated his previous life, the investors and executives and founders and people adjacent to those categories. Some of them didn't recognize him. 4 years, shorter hair, different context. Some of them did. There was a man across the room named Gregory Farwell, who'd been an investor in Carter's company and who saw him from about 40 feet away, did a visible double take, and then raised his glass in an acknowledgement that was almost entirely free of calculation, which Carter appreciated. He did not go circulate. He stayed at the table and talked to Marcus, who was as organized in person as he was in theory, and who had the quality of someone who was deeply competent and absolutely fine with nobody knowing it. "She talks about you, Marcus said at one point, quietly, without making it a thing. Carter looked at him. "Not in meetings," Marcus said. "She doesn't bring personal things into professional contexts, ever, but—" He turned his glass in his hands. "Little things. She'll reference something that happened, not name it, but you can tell. It's not the city version. It's the other version, the one that starts showing up around August." He looked out at the room. "She's better when she comes back from Saturdays, that's all I'm saying." Carter didn't respond immediately. He looked at Lily, who was now teaching Sylvia something that appeared to be a card game she'd invented. "She's good at her job," he said, finally. "Best I've ever seen," Marcus said. "And I've worked for 3 other people like her." "Does it take a lot out of her? All of this?" He gestured at the room. Marcus considered this the way someone considered a question they'd already answered for themselves. "It used to not," he said. "Lately, some. She's not—" He paused, choosing carefully. "She's not running as hard as she was. Like something's changed the calibration." Carter looked across the room to where Vanessa was standing with a group of people doing what she did, present, composed, in control of every inch of herself. She was listening to a man in a blue suit say something, and her face was doing the professional thing, attentive and neutral, and then she glanced across the room and found him at the table, and the professional thing shifted into something else for exactly 2 seconds before she looked back at the man in the blue suit. 2 seconds. Carter felt something move in his chest that he wasn't going to examine in a hotel ballroom. He looked away. "She seems like she's managing fine," he said, which was not a complete description of what he meant. "Sure," Marcus said, in a tone that suggested he understood the distinction. Lily had relocated to Sylvia's lap and was explaining the rules of her card game, which appeared to have grown more complex during the explanation. Sylvia was following along with the focused attention of a woman who had spent years listening to children describe invisible systems as though they were obviously real. "Your daughter's great," Marcus said. "I know," Carter said. The dinner portion started at 8. Vanessa was at the head table, which was what it was. She was hosting, she had responsibilities, she couldn't sit with them. He'd understood this going in and was fine with it. He ate with Marcus and Sylvia and Lily and made conversation with the 2 other couples at their table, one of whom was a couple from Chicago, who were major donors to the foundation, and who were genuinely friendly in a way that required no performance on his part. Lily ate everything on her plate except the asparagus, which she moved to the side with polite efficiency, and drank approximately 4 glasses of the sparkling water that arrived in very small, elegant glasses, which she described as fancy small, and she was very correct about this. At 9:15, the remarks portion of the evening began. Carter watched Vanessa walk to the podium. She was different at the podium, not more herself or less herself, just a different configuration of the same person. The stillness came on her like something she put on, not armor exactly, but a particular quality of presence, and she looked out at the room with the ease of someone who had long ago made peace with being looked at. She spoke for 9 minutes. He timed it without meaning to. She was good, not in the slick, polished way of someone who'd taken public speaking courses, but in the way of someone who had a relationship with words and used them exactly, without excess, without trying to move you by force. She made 3 people laugh. She made a woman 2 tables over put her hand over her mouth and look at the ceiling. He watched her and thought, this is who she is. The same way she'd stood in his garage and watched him work and thought something equivalent about him. They'd been looking at each other for months. He wasn't sure when looking had become something more, but it had, and the gala was making that fact very clear and very unavoidable, which was perhaps what she'd intended when she'd invited him, or perhaps she just wanted him to see her world the way he'd let her into his, and both things could be true. The remarks ended. The dessert table opened. Lily had been monitoring this development with visible patience since approximately 8:40, and she was on her feet before the applause finished. Sylvia went with her. Carter watched them navigate the dessert table with Lily's characteristic strategic approach. Survey the full scope before committing, identify the optimal targets, proceed with intent. He saw Vanessa come off the podium and be immediately caught by a cluster of people. He watched her handle it, gracious, engaged, moving through the group with the ease of long practice. He watched her glance toward his table. He watched her extract herself with the efficiency of someone who'd learned how to do that without anyone noticing they'd been extracted. She was crossing the room toward him when she stopped. He saw it happen, saw the pause, the slight change in her posture, the thing that crossed her face. He followed her eyeline. The man was about 50, silver-haired, with the particular confidence of someone who'd been wealthy long enough for the wealth to become invisible. He was standing near the bar, and he'd seen her, and now he was walking toward her, and there was something in the way he walked, deliberate, with an expectation of arrival, that told Carter this was not a donor she knew casually. He watched her face do something quick and controlled. The man reached her. They spoke. He couldn't hear from where he was sitting, but he watched her body language shift. Not dramatically, not in any way that anyone else in the room would have flagged, but he knew her. He'd spent months learning the difference between her professional composure and her actual stillness, and what she was doing now was a third thing, something he hadn't seen before. She turned slightly and looked at Carter across the room, and the look lasted about 1 second and was completely unreadable. And then she turned back to the silver-haired man. Marcus had come back to the table and was pouring himself more water, and Carter said without pointing, "Who's the man talking to Vanessa? Gray hair, near the bar." Marcus looked up. "Richard Voss," he said. "He's a tech investor, old money plus new money, which is the worst kind." He set the pitcher down. He had a company that was direct competition with the one Vanessa sold 2 years ago. They were in the same acquisition conversations for about 6 months, and he tried to undercut her deal 3 different times. He said it neutrally. She won the deal. He did not. "What's he doing here?" "His foundation co-sponsors this event, has for 3 years. Marcus picked up his glass. "She's very professional about it. She always has been." Carter watched the conversation across the room. Voss was doing most of the talking. Vanessa was listening with the expression she made when she was thinking 5 moves ahead. And then Voss looked across the ballroom, thus deliberately, not accidentally. And his gaze landed on Carter's table, and something in his expression shifted. A recognition, maybe, or a calculation. The look of a man who had just seen something he found useful. It lasted 2 seconds. Carter looked back at him without moving, the way he'd learned to look at things that were trying to see how he'd react. Voss said something else to Vanessa. Carter watched her answer. Brief, controlled. Voss nodded with the performed graciousness of someone who didn't mean it, and moved away toward the bar. Vanessa stood still for a moment. Just a moment, barely noticeable, the kind of pause that looked like nothing if you didn't know what her normal baseline was. Then she walked to Carter's table. She sat down in the empty chair next to him that had been Sylvia's, which meant she was sitting closer than she would have chosen at a table full of people she wasn't sure about, and she set her clutch on the table and kept her expression neutral. "He recognized you," she said. Not a question. "I noticed. Richard Voss and I have a professional history. It's not warm." "I got that." She looked at him carefully. "He used to know who you were, before. He may have put it together." Did it matter that he put it together? She considered this. To him, maybe. He'll make something of it. She said it with the flatness of someone who had made peace with the fact that people like Voss made things of everything. He'll tell people you're here, with me. He'll add whatever context makes the story interesting. What's the interesting version? She looked at him for a moment. That Daniel Carter, who sold a tech company for $2 billion and disappeared, is apparently dating the woman who just closed the acquisition Voss wanted. She said it plainly. He'll make it look strategic. On your part, on mine, because that's how he understands people. The word dating had landed in the middle of that sentence, and neither of them acknowledged it. Is that going to be a problem? Carter said. For me? No, I've dealt with Voss's versions of things before. She looked at the table. For you? I don't know. If it gets picked up, your name comes back into circulation, which I know you didn't want. He sat with that for a moment. I sold the company, he said. My name's already on record somewhere. That doesn't change. It's different when it's current. Yeah, he said. It is. She was looking at him with something that might have been guilt, or the adjacent feeling, the sense of having brought something to someone's door that they hadn't asked for. I should have thought about this more, she said, before I invited you. You thought about it enough, he said. You warned me it was complicated. I underestimated Voss being here. Or you calculated it and decided to come anyway, he said, and he kept his voice easy because he meant it that way. Which is fine. You know your world. She looked at him. Are you angry? He thought about it genuinely. No, he said. And then, because it was true, I'm in your world right now, Vanessa. I knew what that meant. Something in her face shifted. Daniel, she said, and stopped. She'd used his first name, the one he'd been thinking of as more personal, and she'd been using it for months now, but the way she'd just said it was different. Not casual, not the comfortable shorthand they'd developed. Something with weight in it. Lily appeared at his elbow with a plate containing what appeared to be 4 different small desserts. I got a macaron, she announced. It's French. Sylvia told me. She looked at the plate. I also got chocolate thing, and the other chocolate thing, and the little yellow cake. I don't know what that one is. She held the plate up for inspection. Which one do you want? Carter looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Lily's plate with the focused gravity of someone making an important decision. The little yellow cake, she said. I'll trade you my dessert when we go sit down. What's yours? I haven't been yet. You pick for me. Lily considered this responsibility with visible seriousness. Then she looked back at the dessert table. Okay, she said, and turned and went back. Carter watched her go. She's going to take that very seriously, he said. Good, Vanessa said. She should. They sat in the chair and the adjacent chair at the table in the ballroom while the event moved on around them. The slow, warm winding down of things like this, people finding coats and saying goodbyes and making promises to follow up that were varying degrees of sincere. Lily came back with a plate she'd assembled for Vanessa with the precision of someone who had paid attention to what Vanessa liked when she thought nobody was watching. Something chocolate, something small and precise. The little yellow cake she'd claimed. Vanessa looked at the plate. You remembered I like chocolate, she said. You always pick the chocolate one when Daddy makes hot cocoa, Lily said, with the simplicity of someone reporting an observable fact. Carter looked at his daughter. She had been paying attention all these months in her 6-year-old way, which was the most thorough way there was, and she had filed it all away. What Vanessa liked, what made her laugh, what she reached for. and had assembled a dessert plate from that information with the same earnest accuracy she applied to her dinosaur business plan, and her spelling practice, and her theory of optimal pet selection. The weight of it landed somewhere in him that he hadn't expected. He looked at Vanessa, and she was looking at the dessert plate, and something had happened to her face that she wasn't managing, not falling apart. She was not someone who fell apart in hotel ballrooms, or possibly anywhere, but moved. The expression of someone who had received something they hadn't known to want and was working out what to do with having it. She looked up and found Carter looking at her. Neither of them said anything. Around them, the ballroom continued its gentle dissolution. The clink of glasses being cleared, the low music, the sound of 200 people separating back into their individual lives. A normal end to a normal evening by the standards of this world. But at this table, in these two adjacent chairs, something had happened that was not at all normal, or was normal in the specific way that the most important things were, quietly, without announcement, dressed as an ordinary moment. Carter picked up his water glass. "The yellow cake's actually pretty good," he said. Vanessa looked down at her plate, picked up the fork, tried it. "It is," she said. Lily ate her macaron with eyes closed, which was her way of concentrating on a flavor, and declared it tasted like flowers, which Sylvia confirmed was essentially accurate, and the evening moved toward its end. At 11, the car came back. Lily had been awake past her bedtime for over 2 hours and was at the stage of the evening where she was running on sheer interest in her surroundings, which would last another 15 minutes before it cut out entirely. Carter knew this timeline. He'd been monitoring it. Vanessa walked them out to the car. The hotel entrance was quiet. Most guests had filtered out or were still inside. The night was cool in the way that late September in the city was cool, with the quality of something about to change. Lily hugged Vanessa first, which she did without asking, which she always did. Physical affection extended as a simple given, the same way she extended information and opinions. Vanessa hugged her back, and then held on for a second longer than the hug required. "The yellow cake was the right call," Vanessa told her. Lily nodded with satisfaction. "I know." Carter got Lily settled in the car. Seatbelt, shoes off, head against the armrest in a position that was not technically ideal, but was the position she'd decided on. He tucked his jacket around her. He came back to where Vanessa was standing at the entrance. The city moved behind her the way it always did. 23 floors above them, her apartment and the painting on the refrigerator and the kitchen that was large and clean and had never had anyone's drawing on the refrigerator before this year. "You did well tonight," she said. "At the table. The people at the table liked you." "I wasn't trying to be liked." "I know. That's probably why." He looked at her for a moment. "Voss?" he said. "Is he going to cause you problems?" "Voss always causes problems," she said. "I handle them." "Good." He paused. "What he said to you? What made you look across the room like that?" She held his eyes. There was something in her face, something she was deciding how much to give. "He said he didn't know I was seeing anyone," she said carefully. He phrased it so it was both an observation and a question. "What did you say?" "A beat." "I told him," she said, "that he was correct that it wasn't his business." Carter felt something in him go very still in the good way. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. The cool night air moved between them. "Is that—" she started. "Yeah," he said before she finished. "That's okay." He wasn't a man who made large declarations in hotel doorways. He wasn't, honestly, a man who made large declarations anywhere. He'd always expressed things through doing, through the consistency of showing up and the specificity of attention. And he understood that this frustrated people sometimes, the ones who needed it, said out loud in order to believe it. He wasn't sure which kind she was. So he did what he usually did, which was to find the action that said the thing without requiring the declaration. He reached out and adjusted the collar of her coat. It had folded under on one side in a way that was slightly wrong, and smoothed it down, and let his hand rest on her shoulder for just a moment before dropping it. It was a small thing. It was a very specific small thing. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had heard exactly what the small thing said. "Drive safe," she said quietly. "We will." He got into the car. As it pulled away from the entrance and turned out into the city, he looked back once through the rear window. She was still standing at the hotel entrance, in the dark blue dress with the coat, watching the car go. In the back seat, Lily was already asleep, his jacket over her like a blanket, her daisy shoes on the floor of the car, her face in the complicated dark of the moving city, peaceful and untroubled. He turned back to face forward. Outside, New York did what New York did, lit and insistent, every building a declaration, the city that had been his world once and was now something he was passing through. He thought about a small town in the early morning. He thought about the drawing on the coffee maker, Daddy and Me, and the too tall flower. He thought about a back step and cold coffee and a sky full of actual stars. He thought about the thing Vanessa had said to Richard Voss, plainly, in a hotel ballroom full of people from a world that expected things of her constantly. It's not his business. He didn't smile. But something settled in him that had been quietly unsettled for a very long time. It settled the way things settled when they'd been in the right place all along and you'd finally stopped moving long enough to feel it. The article came out on a Monday. Vanessa saw it at 6:40 in the morning before her first coffee, on her phone while she was still in bed. A tech and business publication that ran a gossip column alongside its legitimate reporting, the kind of thing she usually scrolled past without registering. Someone had sent it to Marcus, who had forwarded it to her with no comment, which was Marcus's way of saying, "This requires your attention, and I don't know how you want to handle it." The headline was, "Carter Returns? Reclusive Tech Founder Spotted at Meridian Gala with Holloway." It was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph correctly identified Daniel Carter as the founder of a technology company that had sold for just under $2 billion 4 years ago, and noted his abrupt disappearance from the industry following a personal tragedy. The second paragraph described his presence at the Meridian Foundation Gala as surprising, and noted his apparent connection to Vanessa Holloway, whom it described as one of the most closely watched figures in sustainable tech investment. The third paragraph was the one that made her put the phone face down on the mattress and sit still for a moment. Sources close to Holloway suggest the relationship has been developing for several months, based at Carter's low-profile home base in upstate New York. Industry observers are already speculating whether Carter's reemergence signals a return to active investment, potentially in partnership with Holloway's portfolio. If so, the pairing would represent one of the more significant strategic alliances of the year. She sat with the phone face down and looked at her ceiling. The article wasn't wrong about the facts. That was always the particular problem with pieces like this. They took real things and arranged them into a shape that was technically accurate and entirely false in the way that mattered. Daniel Carter at the gala was a fact. Their months of Saturdays was a fact. The relationship, whatever it was, and whatever they'd been calling it privately, was a fact. But strategic alliance was not a fact. It was Richard Voss's version of events dressed up in neutral language, and she recognized his fingerprints on it because she'd been reading his fingerprints for 3 years, and she knew exactly which sources close to Holloway meant, which was to say, they meant people who were close enough to observe and far enough from her actual life to misunderstand what they saw. She called Carter at 7. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear the garage in the background. An early start, which meant someone had dropped off a car the night before with something time-sensitive. "I know," he said, before she said anything. She stopped. "Someone texted me last night," he said. "Former colleague. Thought I'd want a heads up before it published." "Carter, it's fine." "It's not fine. They're making it sound like you came to the gala as a business move. Like we're some kind of... I know what they're making it sound like." His voice was even, not cold, just settled. "It's not what it is. I know it's not what it is, but your name is back in circulation now. And that's..." She stopped. "You told me you stepped away for a reason. I brought you into a room full of people who apparently can't see a thing without converting it into strategy. And now, Vanessa." He said her name with the particular quality he used when he wanted her to stop moving long enough to hear him. "I'm a grown adult who agreed to come to your event. Whatever's in that article is not your fault. I should have anticipated Voss." "Maybe, but you didn't put the article out." She stood up and went to the window. The city was doing its morning thing below. The particular energy of a Monday, everything accelerating toward the week. "How's Lily?" she said, because she needed to know and because it was the more important question. "She's eating breakfast. She doesn't know about the article, and she's not going to." "Is she going to be okay if it gets bigger? If people start—" "I've thought about that," he said. "She's 6. She doesn't read tech publications. The people in our town don't read tech publications." A pause. "If it becomes something she needs to know about, I'll tell her in a way she can understand. But right now it's just noise in a world she doesn't live in." She pressed her forehead briefly against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the city kept going. "Are you angry?" she asked. It was the same question she'd asked him in the ballroom, and she asked it again because she needed the same honest answer. He took a moment with it. "No," he said, "but I'm going to need it to not become something that touches Lily's life. That's the only thing." "It won't," she said. "I know you can't promise that." "I know," she said, "but I'll do everything I can to make sure of it." A beat of silence. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she repeated. She hung up and stood at the window, and then she called her communications director and spent 45 minutes making sure the article didn't get legs, which it mostly didn't, because she was good at that and because Voss had overplayed his hand, and the publication was minor enough that the larger outlets didn't pick it up. By noon, it had largely faded into the category of things that happened and then didn't matter. By Friday, it was gone. But it had changed something. Not between her and Carter. If anything, the way he'd handled it had clarified something for her. The steadiness of him in the face of exactly the kind of noise she'd been afraid would send him back into his walls. He hadn't retreated. He just stood in it, called it noise, and gone back to work. What it changed was internal. Something in her own accounting. She had spent a significant portion of the previous 4 months managing the two halves of her life with a kind of careful separation. The garage and the Saturdays in one column, the company and the city in another. She told herself this was practical, that it was respectful of what Carter had built, that pushing the two together too quickly was the kind of mistake that destroyed things. She'd also, she now understood, been protecting herself. If the two halves never fully touched, she could believe that either one was optional. That she could, if it came to it, step back from the Saturday world and return fully to the Monday through Friday one, and the loss would be manageable. She'd been keeping the exit available, which was what she'd always done, and the article had forced the two halves of her life to look directly at each other, and the response from both sides of that collision was, nothing broke. It held. That, more than anything, was what she'd been afraid of finding out. Because if it held, then it was real in a way that required something from her. Not a sacrifice exactly, but a decision. A full one. The kind you made without keeping one hand on the door. She went upstate that Saturday with something decided in her that she hadn't had decided before. The morning was October cold, the kind that arrived in the night and made the world look like a different season when you opened the curtains. She drove with the heat on and the radio off, which she'd been doing since June because she'd found that the drive was where she thought clearly, and music interfered with that. She was going to tell him. Not tell him in the sense of a declaration she'd been preparing. She wasn't a person who prepared declarations. She was a person who said true things plainly and let them land where they landed. But she was going to say the thing she'd been circling for months. The specific thing, the actual one. Not it means something delivered quietly on a dark step. The full version. She pulled into the gravel lot at 9:10 earlier than usual. The bay door was up, Carter was inside. She got out of the car and stood in the cold air for a moment, and the gravel was frosty in the shade, and her breath showed. He came to the bay door when he heard the car. He looked at her for a second, then, "Coffee's on." "Yeah," she said, and went inside. The office was warm. The machine had produced something that smelled right. She poured 2 mugs and set his on the desk the way she'd been doing since approximately the 4th visit, and she sat in her chair, and he sat in his, and for a moment they were just that, 2 people in a warm room with coffee while the cold October morning did what it was doing outside. "The article's dead," she said. "I know. Marcus texted me." "Marcus texted you?" "Last week. He said he thought I'd want to know." She looked at him. "Marcus texts you now." Apparently, something in his expression. He also sent me a recommendation for a parts supplier in Albany that he found somehow, which I was not expecting. Marcus is... She stopped. Marcus is something. He's good at his job. He really is. She held the mug with both hands. The heat of it went through to her palms. I need to say something, she said. He looked at her with the attention he gave everything, complete and without hurry. I've been... She stopped, reorganized. I'm not good at this. Specifically this. The part where you say the thing directly. She looked at the mug. I'm good at a lot of things. This is not historically one of them. Take your time, he said. I've been protecting myself, she said. For months. Keeping things in separate compartments so that if something went wrong, I'd have enough distance from it to survive it. That's what I do. I have done it in every relationship I've ever had, every close thing. I build in the distance because the distance is what I use to stay functional when it ends. He was very still. I don't want to do that anymore, she said. With you. With this. She looked up at him. I'm not going to tell you I've got it figured out. I'm going to be bad at parts of it. I'm going to disappear into work sometimes, and I'm going to be late calling back, and I'm going to make decisions without thinking through how they land on you, because those are the ways I'm broken, and I'm working on them, but I can't promise I'm fixed. I know, he said quietly, but I don't want the distance anymore. I want... She set the mug down. I want to be here, not just Saturdays, not just visits. I want this to be the thing it actually is. The office was very quiet. Carter was looking at her with the expression she'd catalogued as the one he made when he wasn't going to say what he was thinking, except this time he said it. I've been in love with you since the rainy Saturday in June, he said. Plain, no ceremony, the way he said things he meant. I didn't say it because I didn't know if you were in a place where you could hear it, and because I needed to be sure it wasn't just... He looked for the word. Loneliness. I spent a long time confusing those two things before Elena. I wanted to be sure. She felt something in her chest that was too large for the small office. Are you sure? She said. Yeah, he said. I am. She didn't cry. She was not someone who cried easily, and she wasn't going to start in a garage office. And she thought if she'd been going to cry, it would have been a year ago when she was still learning to let herself want things, not now when she'd finally gotten there. She got up and crossed the small space between their chairs, which took 2 steps, and she put her hand on his face the way you touch something you'd been afraid to want. And he put his hand over hers and held it there, and they stayed like that for a moment. That was not a movie moment. It was better than that, quieter than that, more honest. Then she sat down on the edge of the desk, because the chairs were not configured for this, and he turned to face her, and neither of them said anything for a while. They didn't need to. Lily came down the hall at 9:40 and found them in the office and looked at the configuration of Vanessa on the desk, and Carter's chair turned toward her with the assessing gaze of a child who is processing new information. Why are you sitting on the desk? She said to Vanessa. It felt right, Vanessa said. Lily considered this. Then she looked at her father. Did something happen? Some things, Carter said. Lily appeared to file this and move on, which was a skill Vanessa had always admired in her. Can we make pancakes? Yeah, Carter said. We can make pancakes. Lily went to the kitchen, and Carter stood up, and Vanessa slid off the desk. And they went to the kitchen, and Lily had already gotten the mixing bowl down from the cabinet by climbing on the step stool with the careful deliberation of a child who had thought about step stools since the elbow incident and was being responsible about it. The morning moved around them. Pancakes were made. Lily's had a blueberry face on them, which Carter assembled without being asked, which was evidence of a long history of blueberry faces. And Vanessa's had too many blueberries because Lily was generous. They ate at the small kitchen table in the October light, and Lily talked about a project at school, and Carter listened, and Vanessa listened, and the table was too small and the chairs were a little mismatched, and someone had left a crayon on the windowsill that was slowly melting in a patch of sun, and none of it was anything other than exactly what it was. That afternoon, while Lily was napping in the unusual way that sometimes still happened when she'd been up late the night before, Vanessa and Carter sat on the back step with coffee. The yard was covered in fallen leaves that hadn't been raked yet and probably wouldn't be for a while. And the sky was the kind of clear that came with cold, everything sharp-edged and bright. I need to ask you something, Vanessa said. Okay. The article, she paused. Not the article. What the article was gesturing at. You selling the company, stepping back from all of it. She turned the mug in her hands. Was that entirely about Lily, or was some of it about not wanting to go back? He thought about it. She'd learned to wait for him to actually think, not to rush to fill the space. Both, he said. In the beginning, it was both. She needed a parent who was actually present, and I couldn't be present in that life, the life I'd been living. He looked at the yard. But after a while, after a year or so, I had to be honest with myself that I wasn't going back even if Lily didn't need me not to. I was done with it. Are you still done with it? He looked at her sideways. Is this the part where you ask me to invest in something? No, she said. I'm asking because if being with me pulls you back into that world, I need to know that's okay with you. On your terms. Not because it's what comes with the package. He was quiet for a moment. I don't want to run a company again, he said. I might want to do something eventually, something different, smaller. He looked at the yard. But I'm not going to do it because of who you are. I'd have to want it for my own reasons. Good, she said. That's the right answer. I wasn't trying to give you the right answer. I know, that's why it is one. He looked at her with the expression that was not quite a smile, and she had stopped trying to fully decode, because she'd decided that some of what he kept in that expression was for him, and that was fine. Are you going to want to be here? He said. Actually here, not visiting. I work in New York, she said. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I know. But I can be here more. I want to be here more. She looked at the yard, the leaves, the October sky. I don't know what the shape of it looks like exactly. I think we have to build the shape. That's fair, he said. It's going to be imperfect, she said. We're going to figure it out as we go, and some of the figuring will be bad. Most figuring is, he said. I know. They sat on the step in the cold afternoon, and the coffee went lukewarm and then cold, and the leaves moved in the yard, and from inside the house they could hear Lily beginning to surface from her nap, the particular sounds of a child returning to consciousness, a small voice talking to stuffed animals, the creak of a bed. Carter said, She's going to make this into a thing. She absolutely is, Vanessa agreed. She's going to have opinions about everything. She already has opinions about everything. We've just been ignoring them. He looked at her. Are you okay with that? With all of it? She's a lot. You know that. She's going to need things from you. Not now, maybe, but eventually. She's going to want to know where you stand. This was the real question, the one underneath all the other ones. Vanessa had thought about this. She had thought about it on drives, in her apartment, in meetings when she was supposed to be thinking about other things. She had thought about what it meant to be in someone's life who had a child, and whether she was the kind of person who could do that, and whether wanting to do it was the same as being able to. She didn't have a clean answer. I can't promise I'll be perfect at it, she said. I don't know how to do it. She stopped. Her own childhood was a separate story, one she'd told pieces of, one she didn't tell all of easily. I didn't have a great example of how it was supposed to go. Neither did I, Carter said. By the time I needed to know. So we're both figuring it out. Yeah. But I'm not going anywhere, she said. That I can promise. I'm in it. I'm not going to show up and then stop showing up. That's the one thing I can make myself hold to. He looked at her for a long moment. That's the main thing, he said. Lily appeared at the back door in her socks, her hair completely rearranged by sleep, carrying a stuffed triceratops and looking at both of them with the direct assessment of someone who had woken up and was conducting a status check. Are you staying for dinner? She said to Vanessa. If that's okay. Lily looked at her father. He nodded once. She turned back to Vanessa with the satisfied expression of a person whose information has been confirmed. We're having soup, she said. It was already decided. Soup sounds good, Vanessa said. Lily went back inside because the status check was complete and soup was not going to make itself. Carter looked at the door she'd gone through, and Vanessa looked at him looking at it, and she understood that he was doing what he did, carrying all of it, The weight of what this was and what it could become. The responsibility of letting someone in when the last time he'd let someone in, she had gone from the world entirely and left him with a small girl and a grief that had taken years to become something he could carry rather than something that carried him. She understood that this was what love actually looked like in a person like Carter. Not declarations in doorways, not romantic gestures, just the willingness to try again, to let someone sit on the back step, to let his daughter draw them into the family portrait, extended quietly, without theater, as a kind of daily ongoing choice. She reached over and took his hand, not dramatically, just took it, the way you took something that was there and was yours. He didn't say anything. He held her hand with the same steadiness he brought to everything, and they sat in the cold yard with the fallen leaves and the late afternoon light cutting low through the tree line. And eventually the light changed and they went inside. The soup was tomato, from a recipe that Lily had decided was the official family recipe on the basis that it was the one her father made when she was sick, which made it important. She helped stir it, which was mostly decorative but was extended to her as a genuine contribution, and she narrated the process with the thoroughness of someone documenting a significant event. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table and watched the two of them at the stove, and the October light was doing the same thing it always did in that kitchen, coming in sideways through the window above the sink, making everything slightly gold. And she thought about all the rooms she'd eaten in, all the restaurants and hotel dining rooms and conference lunches and catered events, the accumulation of thousands of meals in places chosen for their importance, and how none of them felt like this. This felt like the meal was the point. She hadn't known that was something she was missing. The months that followed did not resolve into something clean and simple, because nothing real ever does. They built the shape of it the way she'd said, gradually, imperfectly, with the occasional bad patch of figuring that she'd also promised. There was the week in November when a crisis at her company kept her in the city for 3 Saturdays in a row, and she called every day, but it wasn't the same, and she felt it, the distance, and she understood that feeling. It was not weakness, but information. Information about what mattered, which she used. She made changes at work that were not easy. She promoted people she'd been holding things back from because holding things back from capable people was, she finally admitted to herself, about control and not about results. She gave Marcus an actual assistant of his own. He cried a little, which surprised them both, and she pretended not to notice, which was kind. She started arriving Friday nights sometimes, because Friday nights were their own thing. Carter made dinner without ceremony, and Lily did homework at the kitchen table with the chaotic focus of a child who got distracted by every interesting thought that crossed her mind. And Vanessa helped, which meant mostly redirecting Lily back to the actual homework, while also genuinely engaging with the distractions, because some of them were more interesting than the homework, objectively. Lily's relationship with Vanessa developed the way Lily's relationships developed. On her own schedule, in her own terms, not asked about and not performed. She started asking Vanessa questions with the frank intimacy that meant she'd decided Vanessa was someone whose answers were useful. She asked about business because she'd decided her dog company needed a business plan that was more detailed than her current draft, and Vanessa walked her through it with complete seriousness, which Lily received as her due. She asked about New York and about the elevator apartment and about the Statue of Liberty, which Vanessa eventually took her to see on a Sunday in November, just the two of them, Carter working a rush job, and Lily stood at the base of it in her daisy shoes and looked up and was quiet for almost 30 seconds, which was longer than she was usually quiet about anything. "It really is big," she said finally. "It really is," Vanessa said. "I thought they made it look bigger in pictures." Lily kept looking up. They didn't. They didn't. "Can we get hot chocolate now?" They got hot chocolate. On the drive back upstate, Lily asleep in the passenger seat because she'd fallen asleep before they even left the city, the day having required everything she had. Vanessa thought about what it had felt like to stand at the base of the Statue of Liberty next to a 6-year-old who looked at it with no agenda, no context, no professional calculation, just pure looking. The thing in front of her, exactly as it was. She thought about how she'd gotten so far from that. She thought about how she was finding her way back to it. Not to the Statue of Liberty specifically, to the being present in the actual thing. The capacity to look at what was in front of her without converting it into something useful, without running the analysis, without preparing for the eventual loss of it. She was still bad at it sometimes. She suspected she would always be somewhat bad at it, but she was worse at it than she'd been, and that was not nothing. Carter was in the kitchen when they got back, dinner already on the stove, and he came to the door when he heard the car and looked at the sleeping Lily in the passenger seat, and then at Vanessa with the look she had come to know completely. "How was it?" he said quietly, so as not to wake Lily. "She said it was really big," Vanessa said. "High praise." "High praise," she confirmed. He carried Lily inside without waking her, which was a skill she'd watched him develop over years, the particular muscle memory of a father who had carried his daughter from car to bed 1,000 times in the dark. Vanessa held the doors. After Lily was settled, they sat at the kitchen table and ate the dinner he'd made. Something with chicken, something with vegetables, simple and good, the way everything he cooked was simple and good, and talked the way they talked when the day had been long and neither of them needed to perform anything. She told him about Lily at the statue. He told her about a car he'd been working on that had an engine problem he'd been thinking about for 3 days. And she listened to the thinking, which was detailed and specific and entirely about the problem, and she found it interesting in the way she'd found it interesting from the beginning, not because of the engines, but because of the quality of mind that engaged with them. They did the dishes together. It had become a thing, the doing of dishes, which was the most domestic and ordinary of things, and which she had, in her adult life up to this point, never done with anyone on a regular enough basis for it to become a thing. She washed. He dried. Lily's drawings held their positions on the refrigerator door. "I've been thinking about something," Carter said, at some point. "Tell me." He handed her a dry pan to put away. She knew which cabinet it went in, which still surprised her sometimes. "I've been thinking about the shop, expanding it slightly, not—" He paused, choosing. "Not anything big, but there's a building next door that's been empty for 2 years, and I've been thinking about a restoration side. Classic cars. It's different work, better margin, and it's—" He looked at the dish in his hand. "It's the part I like most, anyway." "Restoration," she repeated. "Taking things that are broken down and making them work again." He set the dish in the cabinet. "It suits me." She looked at him. There was a joke in there somewhere about the nature of what they were both doing, the things they'd each been rebuilding in their own ways. But she didn't make it, because the real version was more important than the clever version. "You should do it," she said. "I'm not asking for your opinion." "I know. You're telling me because it's something you're thinking about. I'm saying you should do it." He looked at her. "I'm going to need to get into the financials," he said, "if I want to do it properly. Do you want help with that?" "I want to do the work myself," he said, "but you can tell me if the numbers are wrong." "I can do that, without making it a business consultation." "I'll try." He almost smiled. "That's probably the best you can do," he said. "It really is," she agreed. She stayed through Sunday. She drove back Monday morning in the gray early light, the highway nearly empty, the trees along the roadside stripped down now to just structure, the bones of what they'd been all summer, the shape underneath. She thought about the shape underneath things. She thought about what she'd been before the highway breakdown, before the garage, before Saturday mornings and cold coffee on back steps. She had been effective. She had been successful by every measure she'd ever been taught to measure. She had moved very fast and built things of genuine value and not looked closely at the cost, because looking closely at the cost required the kind of stillness she had never allowed. She was not a different person now. She was not transformed or fixed or reborn into something uncomplicated. She still moved fast. She still had the acquisition and the board and the portfolio and the things that needed her relentless attention, and she gave them what they needed without apology because that was who she was, and she'd stopped thinking of it as something to cure. But she reached for the word on the empty Monday morning highway. Wider. She was wider than she'd been. She'd been narrow and fast and precise, a needle moving through the world, and now there was more of her. More that she let in, more that she allowed to matter. A kitchen in October. A child in daisy shoes. A man who went very still when he was thinking hard. The specific weight of being known by people who had no reason to want anything from you and wanted you anyway. She crossed the line where the highway met the highway that led to the city and felt, as she always did, the gear change. The city pulling her back into its frequency, the world of deals and meetings and decisions beginning to assemble itself in her mind the way it always did. She didn't resist it. She drove toward it fully, because it was hers too. She'd spent a long time thinking her life had to be one thing or the other. The velocity or the stillness, the city or the back step, the woman who ran companies or the woman who sat in a warm kitchen and ate eggs on Saturday morning. She'd thought those were different lives, competing ones, and that choosing one meant losing the other. She understood now that she'd been wrong about that. The life didn't have to be one thing. She didn't have to be one thing. The velocity and the stillness were both real, both hers, and the only lie had been the idea that she had to pick. She drove through the Monday morning and the city assembled itself in the distance, the skyline doing what it always did, relentless and bright and indifferent to what had just happened 2 hours north of it, and she thought about a girl who drew families in tempera paint with generous yellow, who had put V at the edge of the frame without being asked, in the instinctive faith of a child who decided someone belonged and simply included them. She'd been included at the edge of the frame. She was working her way to the middle. That wasn't everything. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't finished, and there would be more bad weeks and more gaps and more moments of being bad at the parts she was bad at. There would be mornings when the distance between their two worlds felt like more than a 2-hour drive, and evenings when she sat in her large quiet apartment and felt the quiet differently than she used to. But she would drive back on Saturday, and Carter would be in the garage with cold coffee and the specific quality of attention he gave to everything, and Lily would be somewhere in the general vicinity with opinions about dinosaurs and dessert selection and the correct use of vinegar on grass stains. And the table would be small and the chairs would be mismatched, and the light would come through the kitchen window at the same sideways angle, and that would be enough. It would be, she had finally learned to believe, more than enough. The skyline waited. She drove toward it. Behind her, the highway stretched back to the blue building on Harlow Road, where a man was opening the bay door in the Monday cold, and a little girl was deciding which stuffed animal would accompany her to school, and an ordinary day was beginning the way ordinary days began, without announcement, without ceremony, just the world opening again into the next hour of itself. Both things were true at the same time. That was the whole of it. That was everything.